Okay, so it's been a very well. It has been a while since I've done a live stream. The channel was significantly smaller when I last did a live stream. We had, I think, just passed 1,020 subscribers or something. So the channel's grown significantly since I last did a live stream. Obviously, a lot has happened. We've had an NBA finals won by the Boston Celtics, Stanley Cup finals won by the Florida Panthers. So there's still no Canadian team winning the Stanley Cup for the last 31 years. The Arizona Coyotes have now moved to Utah, and the ownership group has now pulled out of the Coyotes organization altogether. So we don't know what's going to happen there. If the NHL will return to the city of Phoenix or the state of Arizona, and the future of the Roadrunners is now up in the air. The Euros has started. The Copa America has started. Lot to dissect. And of course, the group stages of the Euros have now concluded. We have 2 days with no football. So a little bit bored. But I was starting to get a bit of tournament fatigue, personally. It reached a point where so many games were being played, it just got a bit much. And the last few days, I'm like, I need a break. And I'm kind of glad that we do have 2 days with no football. I could do a few non-channel related things. Like today, for example, I went for a nice meal at a country pub. I had a burger the size of my head. It was delicious. And fantastic food. And then tomorrow I'm going to see some friends and have a chilled out day. So yeah, it's nice to sometimes do non-channel things. So without further ado, let's dissect the Euros, and then we'll go on and discuss the Copa America if anyone has any questions about the Copa America and potentially the lack of coverage over here, in part because the Euros is obviously on and is dominating the headlines. So the Euros, England are not the only team to be underperforming and being booed off the field. The media here in the UK is ignoring the fact that Belgium have played worse than England, scored less goals, actually lost a game in the group stage, and were booed off as well. Their game against Ukraine, they were really given it by their fans. Belgium were really hammered by their fans at the end of that game. And I do think the media is focusing so much on England for a variety of reasons, and I don't agree with all these reasons. But and rightly so, England does deserve a lot of criticism. They're not playing well. How they won that group is beyond me with how they played. But it's England are not the only team underperforming or have underperformed at this tournament. Croatia, they've bowed out. They've gone home. Czech Republic is another one. Very disappointed with how the Czechs played. They've been knocked out. Portugal losing to Georgia, for example. Ronaldo's still goalless. Not enough people are talking about that, in my opinion. I think the Georgian fairy tale needs to be spoken about more in the mainstream media. Social media it's been discussed, but not on mainstream media. That they're getting overlooked. I think Italy. Did it last. Italy likes doing things last gasp and in the last minute. That was a nervy game against Croatia, but I don't think Croatia showed enough in the group stage to warrant progressing to the next round. I feel sorry for Hungary not progressing to the next round. I do. I actually do. But some teams just weren't good enough. Scotland weren't good enough. And some other teams, these feel-good stories like Romania, like Slovenia, like Georgia, I don't think are getting really. Slovakia is another one, are really being bigged up enough. I think because they're lesser nations, they're getting overlooked. And who saw Austria winning their group and making their path to the latter stages easier? Who saw that? Who saw Switzerland being as good as they've been in this tournament? So there's been some positive surprises, but there's also been a lot of negatives. And I do think the situation surrounding England and surrounding Gareth Southgate, there is a lot of discussion there, but Belgium are in the same position. They've got some really good players on paper, and they're not performing. They're not scoring goals. Their shot conversion and shot accuracy is appalling. Their accuracy is absolutely appalling. Like, you look at their shooting percentage of target, off target, and chances created, they are appalling. It's just not good enough. And you look at how much these squads are worth if they were a club side. England have got basically the most expensive club side in the world on the field, not performing. Belgium, one of the most expensive squads, if you were to look at how much these players are worth in the transfer market on their last transfer and how much they're paid. And they're performing abysmally. Yet where you've got the Italian squad and the Spanish squad, two of the youngest squads these nations have ever taken to a tournament. Some of the youngest players they've ever taken to a tournament. and they are performing better. You've got some of these lesser nations just going, well, we're not expected to do much. Let's just attack. Attacking football has been the way. Now, we can debate whether the quality of football is as high as what it was 20 years ago. And I've looked at goals per game average, and I've looked at the stats, and when you get a feel for a tournament, the atmosphere at this tournament has been fantastic. But I still think it's not what it was in 2006 when Germany last hosted a major tournament. I felt the World Cup 2006 was a far superior tournament to this one. The pitches held up a lot better. I think the kits were better. I think the kit designs were better. The ball design was better. The atmosphere was better. I think the organisation was better. We've seen multiple security issues with fans getting on the field and a lot of missiles being thrown at players and officials with the beer glasses. I actually think the 2006 World Cup should have been a blueprint for Germany for this 2024 Euros. I honestly do. I don't think it's a terrible tournament. I think so much has happened since the channel's been in existence, but over the last few years. But I do think this tournament is still missing something. It just doesn't have the same vibe as. I don't know whether now with the way international sport is, or sport in general's gone, and the direction sport's taking, that we're feeling a bit more of a disconnect. Maybe there's you get to a point where you saturate sports saturation. But I am getting that feeling that this tournament is missing something. But the atmosphere has been fantastic, and a lot of good goals. Well, look, I think the British media had it in for Ralph Rangnick. I think Austria might actually win the whole thing. I would laugh if Austria win the whole thing and then Cristiano Ronaldo looks like an absolute cock. But Ronaldo's acted like a cock in this tournament anyway. He was petulant in the game against Georgia from reports. And I think Ronaldo, I think he's actually harming the Portuguese team rather than helping them. Pepe's actually being more of a veteran leader than Ronaldo on the field. And what was nice, Pepe didn't play against Georgia and they lose. Just let that sink in. I think the FA, where they've been with that foreign experiment before, and they had Sven and they had Capello. And the irony is, Sven and Capello, especially Sven had a very good record as England manager. Very good record, because he took over partway through a qualifying campaign where we had just lost at Wembley. There was a lot of negativity following Euro 2000 and the failure to get out of the group. Ironically, we beat Germany in Euro 2000 and finished above Germany in our group. Let that sink in. And that's where Germany decided to completely, rewrite everything, look at how the game was structured, the club game and the international development pathways. And they hired Jurgen Klinsmann. And they went, right, we need to completely look at what's going on. 2 years later, they make a World Cup final. 4 years later, they make a World Cup semi-final. And the narrative with Germany changed because it was a long process. But 2014, they win the World Cup. Look, I think he's seen English football for what it is, or football in the UK for what it is, and realises it's a toxic work environment. It really is. I think the media have... have definitely created a very negative working environment. There's a reason why a lot of ex-players don't become coaches. There's a reason why a lot of ex-players, regardless of how good or bad they were as players, don't get into coaching. And there's an issue attracting ex-players not to become pundits, but become coaches, not to leave the football altogether. Because Dion Dublin, let's not forget, Dion Dublin's actually made a pretty good career as a television presenter on non-footballing topics. Graham Lassau's made a good career in the media away from sport, and he got absolutely horrendous abuse from fellow players and in the media, partly because he was educated. So there is a narrative and there's a toxic element to the culture of the sport in this country that is leading ex-players to give up the sport entirely. I mean, there was a Manchester United player from the class of '92 who's now a postman, or was a postman, retired, and I think lives quite a happy life. He just went, no. There's a reason why David Bentley retired young. And it's not because he was a bad player. It wasn't because he had a load of injuries. No. He just went, this sport is completely losing its way. That was a decade ago. He was like, nah, sport's gone down a dangerous path. Too much money, too many mercenary players, not enough community involvement, public. Well, he made a whole list of the sport is fucked. David Bentley, one of my favourite players, he's only a few years older than me, but he's one of my favourite players. He played for Blackburn, played for this is funny. Played for both Arsenal and Tottenham. Doesn't get the same abuse as Sol Campbell. I find that weird. Plays a decade, comes to the scene a decade after Sol Campbell. Doesn't get the same abuse when he's played for both North London clubs. I really don't understand that. Really do not understand that at all. Starts at Arsenal, goes to Spurs, doesn't get the abuse. Campbell starts at Spurs, goes to Arsenal, gets death threats. I just do not understand that at all. I think Pickford and I think Declan Rice, I can see them actually being quite good coaches. I can see Declan Rice doing quite well in coaching. He seems quite a pleasant individual. Declan Rice seems like a normal human being. The abuse his partner's faced, I think it's his fiance, but his girlfriend's faced on social media is disgusting. He dealt with that really well. And Pickford as well. I think Pickford and Declan Rice for me seem away from the game, normal people. They're not. I mean, what I find interesting is every time we have a major international tournament, regardless of what it is, they get the advertising campaign. And it's very, very funny that Jack Grealish got signed up by Hellmann's, and then he's the day after that advert first airs, he's dropped from the squad, which I think Southgate's potentially regretting now. If Southgate actually wasn't so stubborn and so rigid in his thinking, I think he might be regretting not taking Grealish and Ward-Prowse and a few others to the tournament. I don't understand why he's taken a player who's clearly not going to play a single minute in Luke Shaw, who's clearly injured. Trippier is not 100% fit. We've got no one else who can adequately fill in at left back. Because that makes no sense to me. But no, if you're talking about like coaches, I would say Pickford, Ramsdale, and Rice. The others, I don't think so. I don't. But then again, I was surprised when Gerrard, Lampard, and Rooney all got into it. But then they've been hammered by the media, and then the social media aspect, because the look. I don't think Rooney did a bad job at Derby, and I don't think Lampard did a bad job at Derby or Chelsea either. They were limited with, especially they've both been limited by transfer embargoes. And when the transfer embargoes were in place, if you look actually at their percentages of win record and the fact they had to play kids basically with a couple of veterans, they didn't do bad. But the media has spun this narrative about those three, that they're useless, don't know what they're doing, etc., etc. And a lot of these idiots, these armchair keyboard fans, some may actually go to games, but they believe the media drivel. They believe the crap. And I feel sorry. I do feel sorry. I mean, yes, Wayne Rooney clearly has an issue with alcohol. That's obvious. He clearly has some. Alcohol is a weakness. He's not an alcoholic, but he's clearly one drink becomes two, and then some bad decisions are made. I'm not saying he's an alcoholic. Brian Clough was an alcoholic, but Gerrard and Lampard. Gerrard's got the problem that he comes from a very big footballing family. His cousin used to be Everton goalkeeper, and he comes from a city which in Liverpool is one of those cities. It's a weird city, Liverpool. It's weird. Beautiful city, the city centre, but it's just it's a Jekyll and Hyde city. And of course, he did reasonably well in Scotland. It didn't work at Villa, and I feel sorry for the crap he's getting. Lampard as well. I do, and because Lampard, his dad played for West Ham, and his uncle's Harry Redknapp, and his cousin's Jamie Redknapp. Again, there's that added. Well, you're from a footballing family, and there's that, But they were good players. But maybe coaching isn't necessarily suited to them. But they've made a lot of money, and if they've been correctly advised, and if they've been smart, and there's nothing. People say Wayne Rooney's this uneducated, knuckle-dragging, greasy chav. He's got more GCSEs than I do. He's actually, I think Gerrard did reasonably well at Rangers. I think Villa, he came to Villa at a time when they were in transition. Wrong club, wrong manager. I think 5-10 years later, or a couple of seasons later, that could have been a perfect decision. Right, that could have been a perfect decision. It just happened at a time when it wasn't a right fit. It just didn't work out. That doesn't make him terrible. But he decided to start his managerial career in a different country. Wayne Rooney decided to go over to the US and a different style and a different sporting culture. And they're still getting bagged for it. And I feel sorry for them. But especially Rooney, with the age he burst onto the scene, he was actually younger than Gerrard and Lampard. Even though they made their debuts at a similar age, he was actually 16. They were 18 years old when they made that. he's been living in the spotlight since 2002. Gerrard and Lampard, there were other players in the teams they played in that sort of softened the blow a little bit, and they were already established by the time social media becomes popular in the mid 2000s, whereas Rooney was still this young, aggressive, raw player in the mid 2000s. He'd made his big move from Everton to Manchester United, and Euro 2004 was just fresh off the background, and World Cup 2006, Germany's just fresh off, and how that ended for him, and how England lost to Portugal in the quarters, penalty shootout. And social media was in its infancy, like MySpace and Facebook was about to come along, and Bebo was a thing. I'm talking about social media sites; some of them don't even exist anymore. But he was still young enough to be impacted by the social media style of things, and the change in the generation where 24-hour news cycle, more people had digital TV. The digital revolution really kicks in. So our generation basically, and he's lived his life with press intrusion, whereas Lampard and Gerrard not so much. Even though their wives and girlfriends are also quite famous, Wayne Rooney was the David Beckham of his decade, and I think that has had a negative impact on him. But any mistake he makes, but the media is very toxic, and the sports media in the UK is exceptionally toxic. I can't comment on what the sports media is like in the US, for example, or Canada, or mainland Europe, although I have read the Gazzetta dello Sport, the English version, and that can be quite cutting. If they want to criticise a performance of an Italian team, be it football or rugby, they will, knives come out and they will not hold back, but they won't go after personal attacks of people personally away from the game, if that makes sense. They'll just go after, this is not good enough, bang, bang, bang. But I think their media culture is different. Our problem is because of their fame, despite going a different league, media will follow. Will still, I think does have a good future in coaching. He has a good future in coaching, and it's when they found out his origin story that suddenly it becomes this social media thing, and the mainstream media look at social media and go, "We need to get on this," to then publish something on social media to get people to go onto our digital online. The Athletic or Gazzetta dello Sport or whatever international publication it is, And when they found out he learned football tactically by Football Manager, people just laughed at it. But then he actually is a decent coach, and he has a passion for the sport. And not every coach has to be an ex-player. Not every coach has to be an ex-player. Mourinho, while he did actually play at amateur level, was actually a sports journalist and a translator. And look at what he's achieved. So don't think just because most 90% of coaches and managers have played the game that every coach or manager has to have played the game. Again, that's a false narrative that's struck. If you do your coaching badges, don't matter. Do coaching badges. I could do my coaching badges if I wanted to. If I had the money, I would sign up and do my FA coaching badges. But for me, I don't think I have the patience to. My game plan would be simple: 4-3-3, high press, and pace on the wings. That would be my way of looking at it. I wouldn't want to be defensive. I would just go right, go for it. Just go for it. Enjoy yourself. Go out and try and win. If you lose, you lose. We learn from the defeat. We go, why did we lose? Okay. And the only way you really need to coach is set plays and defense. Attack should come naturally. If you are overcoaching the attack, you're killing the flair of your players. Simple game. It's a simple game that some coaches really get. They get the sports scientists in, the advanced analytics in. You like, do the players really need all this crap? When all you've got to do is see what's in front of you, scan what's in front of you, and play. All you then have to do on set plays is free kicks, corners, and defense. Defensive structure without the ball, what we do without the ball, how to defend set plays. Right, we're going to do zonal, or we're going to go man to man. Where does the goalkeeper Goalkeepers need specialist coaching. And in attack, right, here's it simple. What are you strongest on? Okay, you're quick, you've got a good right foot, you're a right winger. You're quick, you've got a good left foot, you're a left winger. You're two-footed, you're in the middle. Simple. It is such a simple thing. 4-4-2, same thing applies. 4-5-1. It doesn't matter what your formation is, but in attack it should be play what's in front of you. I'm not going to overcoach you in attack. That's what the training ground is when you form your combinations with your teammates, negative and positive. And if I see a positive relationship between players, you're going to play. If you're fit, you're going to play. If you want to, and the player who's the understudy needs to learn the role of the player he's going to replace. If he's going to, if there's a player who's on the bench and he wants to become a starter, their goal is to pick the brains of the player who's ahead of him in the lineup for form, fitness, or whatever it is, and understand what his role is defensively without the ball, and on set plays, be it defensive, okay, we're defending this, or this is a set play we're doing. That's all. I would keep it simple. Some coaches, like Southgate, is clearly overcomplicating things. He's clearly overcomplicating things. All they've got to do is defensive structure without the ball. This is how we line up. This is how we press as a group. This is how our formation is going to be without the ball. This is how hard offensive line is going to be. With the ball, right, okay. It doesn't matter if the two wingers want to swap over, if it's a 4-3-3. It doesn't matter if one player wants to come a bit deeper, just start distributing. Just play what is in front of you. I'm not going to coach you too much, and that's what you've got to do. There'll be certain aspects where, okay, you would want to, practice your close coordinated skills and passing triangles. But it's basically total football is basically what I'm saying, is without the ball, we press. With the ball, attack freely. If you want to go forward, one of you has to drop back. So if the centre-back wants to go on a nice mazy run like, I don't know, Guehi or Stones, Miney or Rice just drops back into that hole. Just to cover that player if the ball gets turned over. If the ball gets turned over, that holding midfielder stays in that hole. The other defensive midfielder goes to tackle. Simple. That's why total football was really, really good. Okay, it didn't quite work in 2 World Cup finals, but total football, if done properly, would have won 2 World Cup finals if it just was for the upstairs bit. It literally is you hunt in packs 3 or 4, you pressurise the ball, player of possession, and you cut off the passing avenues where it has to be a high risk, low percentage pass to actually do the play. Yeah, but Mark Goldbridge is also an absolute. He might have got a house out. Slovenia will always play 4-4-2. It's how they always play. It's not hard. I could have predicted the Slovenian 4-4-2 formation and it's gone right. I'll just pick 11 players. Goalkeeper picks himself, and the other 10 players who's the most informed and who's the most experienced. There you go. I could have done that. Goldbridge just dribbles a lot of crap. Okay, occasionally he spouts a bit of sense, but I can't stand how Mark Goldbridge has got a job, because if he thinks he can manage Man United, he thinks he can do a better job than Ten Hag. Well, okay, then put your name in for this, put your CV in, and say, right, I'll give it a go and see how far if he did his coaching badges and talk and said and backed up the crap he says, he'll be sacked every day of the week. Mark Goldbridge just talks absolute drivel. He talks shite. He is a clickbait merchant. He's a crisis merchant. And he's obsessed with Man United to the point where I think as soon as Manchester United is mentioned, he gets an erection. If Man City or Liverpool are mentioned, he has erectional dysfunction. He is that obsessed with Old Trafford, the Glazers, Sir Jim Radcliffe, and Manchester United and nothing but that he must have a walking hard-on for the Red Devils. He cannot be objective. He's a crisis merchant and he spouts utter shite. How he's got a job in any media organisation is beyond me. And the amount of people online who just go, you're talking shit. The Euros is easy to predict. Slovenia is a 4-4-2, right? Serbia, we're going to kick lumps out of the players, especially the players of colour. We know they were going to do that. Their fans, that is a known trait of Serbia. They were going to be thuggish, they were going to be physical, and they were going to target the players of colour. They did that. It was obvious in that game, right? Simple, right? England against Denmark. Denmark, well, they're solid, they're organised, and they're good offset plays. They've got some good technical passes, and they like the game to be at a certain pace, which we played into. Anyone could have predicted that group. It is not hard. It is not hard, right? I could have gone a day before the Euros, got into a mind reader's tent, one of those old, I've got the card tarot readers, right? And I could have been told all this. It's not hard. The tarot reader, well, this is what's going to happen. I wouldn't necessarily say we would have won the Euros with a different manager, because you can't predict a penalty shootout and you can't predict, what the opposition are going to do when they go 1-0 down. You just can't predict that. I wouldn't have predicted England to have easily, swept aside Germany in the Euros. Germany at tournament football, regardless of how bad they're playing, comes up against England. They seem to put in a fight. I couldn't have predicted how bad the Germans were going to be. Trent Alexander-Arnold should have never been played in midfield, and I would have gone for Minu over Gallagher any day of the week. But the fact that Mark Goldbridge was saying this 2 days after it was already leaked that Gallagher was going to be put in the side anyway, through TalkSport, a station he works for, tells me nothing that we didn't already know. But Mark Goldbridge, he's a crisis merchant. He always has been. He does spout some utter drivel. But because it's all clickbait and people keep clicking those articles and keep tuning into his radio show and keep watching on YouTube, he keeps getting work. He's one of the most. I do not understand this. He has an obsession with one club, which is bordering on more than just obsessive. We're talking serial killer levels of obsession, and he's a crisis merchant. But Mark Goldbridge sums up the British mainstream media, from TV to print journalism to online journalism to freelance. Toxic as shit. But there we go. But that's my opinion on Mark Goldbridge, and a few others as well. There's a few others I just don't know how they can justify how much money they're paid. I feel that some of the games with commentary has been really good, and some of the commentary has been utterly diabolical. I don't actually mind a female presenter or a female commentator, but Enya Luko, my God, how does she keep work? Because she is absolutely atrocious. We've got 2 number 10s. We've actually got one player with a number 10 on his back, and that's Bellingham. I don't know what. Do we have another number 10? Bellingham's actually wearing 8. It's actually Foden who's wearing 10, but we have 2 number 10s. Do we really? I thought there's only one in the squad with the number 10 on his back. Enya Luko, I don't know how she's still got a job, and it's not because she's good at it. But then you've got some brilliant female presenters and pundits, absolutely fantastic female journalists, sports journalists and pundits. And then you have Enya Luko, which just feeds into that narrative of, well, women should stay away from men's sport and focus on women's sport and vice versa. That makes my head explode, because you've got Gabby Logan, who's an ex-professional gymnast, whose husband is an ex-professional rugby union player. And some of her best mates, like Claire Balding's one of her best mates, is ex-professional equine rider, and her brother's a horse race trainer. They know their stuff. I have no problem. You had Sue Barker, ex-professional tennis player, fantastic tennis player, fantastic knowledge on not just tennis but all sports. And then you have Enya Luko, and then who's the Brummie? The ex-Birmingham City player, and she's got the Brummie accent. I think she gets a lot of unnecessary hate. She actually knows what she's talking about. What's her name? And it's going to annoy me because she was a very good women's player, and it's really annoying me. And Karen Carney, I think she's all right. I like Karen Carney. I think she actually really knows her stuff, and she's been very passionate about a sport. When she started playing, it wasn't the thing for women and girls to play football or rugby, for that matter, league or union. It wasn't the thing. Women's sport now, she's very knowledgeable. She's very passionate about Birmingham City and the issues they're facing. And I feel sorry for the crap she gets, because other really poor journos are just there because they tick a box for a quota. And this is the problem. We've got this toxic element where we've got a very masculine fan base and a very masculine sport, allegedly, even though football players, in my opinion, go down like a sack of shit if someone sneezes near them. which is why I like ice hockey and rugby league, because players actually play through broken ribs, punctured lungs, fractured shoulders, fractured eye sockets, missing actual parts of their face. And I remember one ice hockey game, some guy had all his whole jaw just shattered, and he came back out with the cage on with they'd actually stapled his lip back together, picked up at least 4 of his teeth that they could find out of the 12 he lost, and he put on the full face cage. And then the first shift he's back on. He's clearly concussed and shouldn't have played, but he puts his shoulder through the guy who slapped the shot into his face to break his face and took him out. And then got a game misconduct and then didn't play for 6 weeks because they found out that he actually fractured all up his jaw and up his orbital bone, and that was his season done. But there's the difference, you see. Football player, oh, you cut my shirt, I'm going to throw myself to the floor. Ice hockey player, I've had a puck hit me in the face at 110 miles an hour. I've lost half my teeth and part of my upper jaw. They've stapled my lip back together because all this bit here was just, he had 2 mouths, stapled it back together, bit of glue, bit of gaffer tape, put on a full face cage helmet, go out there, first shift back out, still a bit, put an elbow through the opposition player's head, he's broken your face. That, I prefer that, because there's no self-preservation there. Whereas football, I'm going to roll around the floor up tonight. Jamie O'Hara is interesting because he comes across as that drunken idiot in the pub. He comes across that bloke in the pub who claims he knows everything after about 4 pints of Stella, and probably his wife beats him up, and his wife dominates him. So he gives it all that, but really he's a nothing. Goldbridge, Rory Jennings, all of them benefit from. They're all dribblers. Thogden? Who's Thogden? I have no idea who that is. So that shows how little I follow club football these days. Kelly Cates and Laura Woods. Laura Woods, I think, again, I mean, she does make the odd error, and I do remember when she first started in her broadcasting career, actually on camera and on the radio, there was a few gaffes in there. She made a few errors, seemed a bit uncertain. And fair play to some of her male colleagues. Just went, no, we're going to help you out here. We'll distract the listeners and the viewers, and we'll say something just so you can recover your nerve and get your composure back, and get back onto And that's what you need. Sometimes with an inexperienced presenter or journo, you do need to have the experienced ex-player or other journalist there just to take the heat off them a little bit and allow them just to get through an awkward moment. I think Laura Woods is all right. I wouldn't say she's terrible. I don't think she deserves the hate she gets. I don't think she deserves a lot of the leering, pervy comments she gets as well. This is another problem. And it's a problem women in the mainstream media and in sport media have faced for years. And it's one of the reasons why I've got another Twitter again, but I use that personal rather than the channel. I stopped using it for the channel altogether. It weren't growing the channel, and I look at where people are sharing stuff. People are using Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp and email to share my videos now. They're not using Facebook. They're not using Twitter. They haven't no one's shared a video of mine on Facebook for over a year. I wouldn't say Capello spoke little to no English. I think he didn't understand the English club game. I think that's where the issues lied. Is the club rivalries. He didn't keep a lid on the Man United, Liverpool, Arsenal, Tottenham, Chelsea, and everyone. He didn't keep a lid on the club rivalries that were there in the English game, and he only picked players from the fashionable clubs, because there were some really good players playing at other Premier League clubs that could have and should have been selected, and he overlooked them because they weren't part of the clubs that were playing in Europe all the time. So mistakes were made in player selection and in understanding and trying to foster, basically trying to make the guys all mates, basically, which is not going to happen. But trying to make players understand that the club rivalries go out the window, and here, this is our family for this month, this 6-week period. When you're in camp, what you wear on your shirt Monday to Friday, 9 months of the year, that club crest disappears. You're now wearing it. You didn't get enough players to truly buy into, we're all in this together. I think Southgate's done that to a point. I think you can definitely see a bit more of players putting their club rivalries aside and what they've been told by the managers. I want you to go out there and I want you to earn him. Because that was an issue that has been regularly brought up over many, many years. by many former players. And it's not just an English thing. This is also many countries have faced this problem where if you're picking the majority of your players from the same league domestically, back in the day, most national sides did this. This could cause a massive, massive problem in the dressing room. And a lot of it was down to club rivalry and players not seeing eye to eye because of what happened in the league season or league seasons and cup games building up to that international camp or tournament. And that really derailed the 94 qualifying campaign where we didn't qualify. It derailed the 2008 campaign where we didn't qualify. And it caused issues at World Cups and Euros that we did qualify for decades. The only manager who managed to successfully negotiate the club rivalries was Sir Alf Ramsey. That is generally terrifying. He was the only manager truly where he managed to negotiate the club rivalries. But I think back in the 50s and 60s and to a certain extent the early 70s, the hooligan element hadn't taken over, and football was still in a battle with rugby league, cricket, and rugby union to become the national sport that we see today. Until that World Cup in '66, and even until Pele and 1970, football hadn't quite reached the level of international competition that it has now. Even though Uruguay were the first team to win the World Cup, and Italy were the first two-time winners, and Uruguay were the second two-time winners. And you could technically argue the first in the modern era, post-World War II, but that's again a separate debate for another day. Football wouldn't actually fully become this global game until about USA 94. As soon as the game took the World Cup and the World Cup was announced as going to the US in 94, that's when we see the ramping up of because I've got football programs and memorabilia and historical stuff in all my see all around here, all the crap. That's where all the sports memorabilia is, all the books, all the history stuff, everything that goes for both channels is there. Everything in those boxes on that table. So when I do film reviews, when I do book reviews, everything's there. For the other channel, when I look at history stuff, a lot of it's there. And you don't fully appreciate where what we now see is this national obsession. I would say it's about USA 94. USA 94 is where I think the world as a whole wakes up and goes, right, okay, this is our gig now. Because you've got the Americans on board. You've got the Americans to buy in and want to basically embrace this sport. Now, USA 94 was a shit World Cup. No one's denying that. The quality, the goals per game average, I can look at the goals per game average from Italia 90 until now, similar to what I did with the Euros, and look at the goals per game. And I will tell you now, USA 94, very low scoring World Cup. Very low scoring, I'd have no doubt. It would go in parallel with what the 90s and the Euros were looking at, with the lowest goals per game average at that point. The early 90s defences really strangled the life out of attack. Well, Calamity James was actually publicly the media, and they had that going since before Capello, even before Sven was in charge of the England setup. Calamity James, that's when he was a Liverpool player. I remember that in the 90s. And I've actually got the Premier League annual from 96. I've got tickets and my programme from Anfield in 96 on my birthday, against Sheffield Wednesday. Sheffield Wednesday won 1-0 in the snow. He was called Calamity James before Capello. I think he thought that was the nickname. I believe there was a lost in translation and he didn't quite get, because the media were very, very toxic. And he obviously felt more comfortable talking about very serious tactical stuff and squad discussions in Italian with a translator. So he didn't make a gaffe. He wanted to go, I'm comfortable speaking Italian to the media because I've done that for 30, 40 years in Italy comfortably, no problems. And he just asked for his translator because Ranieri spoke English before he went to Chelsea. Ranieri felt comfortable with a translator to begin with at Chelsea because he, again, had faced questions in the media for 3-4 decades in Italian. And he didn't want his answer to be, come across wrong. But I do understand that Ranieri is genius. Ranieri is a beloved figure. Capello has been a very divisive figure, even in Italian football, for many, many years. Ranieri has always been loved in Italian football, whereas Capello has not. And Capello's got more success. Let that sink in. Ranieri has less success than Capello, but Ranieri has always come across as a very affable, nice person to work for, nice person to talk to, very knowledgeable, very pleasant. Capello comes across as a bit more of a dictator and a bit more, if you do it my way, well, you're out. There's less. There seems to be a personality clash with how they expect the people they work with and work for them to perform. Now, Ben Foster's an interesting one because he decided to call International Football a day after the 2018 World Cup because he didn't want to work with Southgate. He's been very critical of Southgate as well. He had a good season or two left in him where he could have been a decent, solid second or third choice keeper just to take to a tournament and go, look, we need an experienced guy here to help Pickford, help Ramsdale, help Pope or Heaton, whoever else was being selected. Get Ben Foster in that squad. I would have happily had Ben Foster in the squad for the Euros because he would have definitely given that kind of elder statesman, I'm going to put my arm around this player, you made a mistake, don't worry about it. I've made mistakes, bosh, there you go. You always need that veteran who's probably not going to play many games, but can definitely be there to, help out the younger players, help them adjust to international squad life if it's their first training camp. And he basically said, "No, I'm good. I'm done." Vardy went, "No, I'm done. Not playing for this guy." And he's not playing the title. Basically, Vardy and Foster. Vardy went on to win an FA Cup with Leicester, and he basically went, "Nah, the way this guy plays is not for me. He's not going to suit my skills and I'm going to be wasted." And it's the same with Ben White. People are criticising Ben White, right, for basically saying, I'm not playing for my country while this clown's in charge. And he's come out and basically publicly bagged the coaching setup and how they prepare for games and their style of play. He goes, no, this is crap. Why am I going to these training camps? You're not going to play me in the friendlies. You're not going to play me off the bench. You're not going to play me as a starter. Why am I actually here? What am I benefiting from? I do some training ring. I run around a training pitch for 2 days and then I don't do anything. Not saying that Ben White's the best player out there for Arsenal or the best in his position in that he's eligible to play for the country, but he's basically said, I'm not playing for these two clowns, Holland and Southgate. And that tells you all you need to know about what players I think actually perceive Southgate to be now. I think Southgate has lost the playing group. I think not the way he had the whole Grealish thing. I think as soon as he dropped Grealish and the way it was handled and the way it was announced to the players from reports, he's lost the playing group. Sorry, he's lost the playing group. They don't look happy out there. Those press conferences are a car crash. This is a car crash of an international tournament. Regardless of where we finish, and if we do make a final, fine. If we do make a semi-final, I don't care where England finish. It has been a car crash of a PR nightmare for the FA and the England setup. Honestly, it has. The play has gone backwards and has become even more insipid than some of the issues that were highlighted during the building phase, as I call it, between 2016 and 2021, when you could definitely see there was growth and there was a plan. Now there seems to be just a car crash after car crash after car crash. And when you're leaving up players like Ward-Prowse and Grealish, these are game changers. Ward-Prowse is brilliant as a set play specialist. He may not be the best midfielder, but he scored more goals from set plays, direct free kicks, than Messi since 2018. How is this not registering? It's like you've got a player who's got a better scoring percentage from a certain style of play than one of the greatest players of all time in the selected time frame whilst playing at the highest level. How is this guy not in the squad? How are you overlooking? He's been a club captain. He's basically he's played on teams that people don't look at. He's a workhorse. He will try every game. He may not be the best player, but he will try. And he's an adequate replacement for Henderson as an engine room in midfield. I'm not going to take him. You're not even considering him. This is what I find a bit of a head scratcher. Is Ward-Prowse the best player? No. Is he an engine room who's a workhorse? Yes. Will he run all day? Yes. Will he be brilliant off set plays? something which we could rely on, which we relied on in 2018 to make a semi-final? Absolutely. Will he ping a dangerous ball into the box? Yes. Good off corners? Yes. Free kicks? He can ping them in from 35 yards direct. This is where I don't understand Southgate's logic with some of his selections, his tactics, and who's playing where. Capello stripped Terry. Yeah, the whole Terry captaincy thing was at about a similar time to the Wayne Bridge situation and the racism scandal with Anton Ferdinand. I seem to remember with the Terry captaincy and giving the captaincy. I forget who became captain after that, but that didn't go down well. That went down rather badly. But the David James, Calamity James, he was known as that well before Capello came along, and I think they got brought up, and he thought it was a nickname. I think he thought it was a nickname or a term of endearment for David James, but that really showed a disconnect again between the culture here and the culture in Italy. I'm not when Sven came. I felt the Sven era was actually quite good. I didn't think Sven was a bad manager for England. I think he came along at a time when there were a couple of national sides that were that bit better, but he restored some national pride. We beat Germany in Germany and put 5 past them. No team had done that before. Footballers back in the 90s, it was normal lads, privileged cotton. Yeah, you could argue that in a lot of sports. You could argue that a bit more in rugby league, especially in Australia and New Zealand now, and the AFL. You definitely could make the privileged argument, as I say, for a lot of sports. The whole, it's like, because I'm a massive rugby league fan, and I like listening to some of the podcasts, especially with some of the players who are in their 40s and 50s, ex-players in their 40s and 50s, and you hear about how when they were in reserve grade or in the junior grades and reserve grade, and they were fringe players and they were just breaking into the first team squad, that they actually had to go and have day jobs. And you would hear stories about some of the senior players when they were coming through would work Monday to Friday, train 2 nights a week and play on the Saturday or the Sunday. And if they got injured, that meant they may not be able to earn any money on the Monday to Friday at their day job because they've broken their arm or they've done their knee or they've been concussed. And you're thinking about it going, but you hear about these ex-players who are beloved in their communities. You know, they've gone on to have really good jobs outside of sport where they've set up their own businesses. You know, they've done very well. They've either got into property, construction. They've gone on to go to university, all these other things. And then you're hearing about players who've come along since the 90s and they've got issues with alcohol, gambling, they've been bankrupt, they've got drug problems. And I do think they're given too much money too young. The social media side of things, I don't think helps. I think you have they're spoon-fed from the age of 11 all the way up. And I don't think they're also being looked after properly, because we've heard some pretty tragic stories of how when they hit about 15, 16, 17, they're told, we're not going to extend your contract, you're out the academy, there you go, you're not good enough. And then the aftercare isn't, but they've not been shown the real world. And then they're in the real world at 17, 18, 19 going, well, I don't know what to do. And then you hear these same stories about these senior pros who don't have a clue what to do, 32 to 35, and they're like, go to the airport, my passport's expired. What do I do? And they phone up maybe an old manager or their old club going, can you help my passport? They're like, you don't work here anymore. you haven't been on contract. So there is, I think they are. I think a lot of these young players, without no fault of their own, are thrust into the spotlight. I don't think they're prepared for the real world. The majority of 95 don't make it in a career past the age of 21. Most of them will end up playing amateur or semi-pro and actually have to get a day job, and a lot of them just aren't given the skills to survive in the real world. So it's sort of like this now, where I have a day job Monday to Friday, but I do this as a hobby. Basically, they'll have to get a day job Monday to Friday, and basically their sport, okay, they get paid to do it, semi-pro, but they'll have to treat it as a hobby. And I think this is where some of these professional players or ex-professionals, like Ricky Lambert, for example, have done quite well. Grant Holt, Jamie Vardy, Ian Wright, all of these came through the non-league into the Football League. And Ian Wright, okay, Jamie Vardy, Grant Holt, and Ricky Lambert are the only players to score in the non-league in every league in the Football League and the Premier League. Ian Wright went from non-league to Division 1, missed out the old Division 2, Division 3, Division 4, went straight Palace. But she's not earning superstar money. And then they had to start out in the non-league as a semi-pro, potentially a pro player, and then work their way up the divisions. And they had to do it the hard way. I think that's why they come across as more lovable characters, more like those lovable rogues, but actually they're normal human beings with the proper working class roots, where they've actually had a grotty, low-paying, grafting day job. I mean, Ian Wright's a plasterer. Stuart Pearce is a plumber or electrician. Is it electrician or plumber? I can't remember if Stuart Pearce is an electrician, but he's fully qualified tradie. Ian Wright was a plasterer's labourer. They actually did real stuff, like on building sites. I went and watched Darlington this year, and if you look at nearly the entire team, they're all ex-Arsenal, Man United, Liverpool, Chelsea academy players at some point. Well, they've just been cut from because they get the 14, 15-year-old teenager from Italy or Germany or South America, get them in, the mercenary, and then the local lad gets pushed out. It's going to happen at Reading, where there are training grounds down the road. I actually do fear for Reading's future. But yeah, no, I wouldn't be surprised if, like Maidenhead United up the road from me, and I will literally be walking past their stadium tomorrow as I get off the train. I wouldn't be surprised if I looked at their squad and where they started out their careers. A lot of them would have come through the non-league, but a fair few of them would have gone through clubs higher up the footballing ladders, academies, and for whatever reason have either been released, signed on loan, signed on a free, whatever it may be. But the game has changed. Unfortunately, I don't think that the sport does enough to look after young players and look after players when they come near the end of their careers and prepare them. And we're talking all levels. I think the lower levels, I think the players are more prepared for the real world. Those who played League One, League Two, maybe professional in the non-league. But those at a higher level, like Championship and Premier League, I just don't think they're fully prepared. And that's the same across Europe, fully prepared for post-playing life, because not all of them are going to go into coaching. There's only a finite number of clubs to coach at, but I just don't think they're fully prepared for the real world and the realities of the real world, having to pay bills, living on the breadline. And a lot of them aren't well advised what to do with their money. And some of their wives and girlfriends are in it for the cash. Let's be honest. Some of them, I don't honestly think all these people are happily married. This is why I really respect Declan Rice and how he stood up for his partner, and how they try and shun the limelight about their private life. I feel a lot of sympathy for him, and I think he's got his head on his shoulders, and I think he'll do very, very well post playing. I think he's got a very, very bright future in the game as a player, potentially as a coach, but also potentially he could do anything outside the game. We know. I was looking for a book yesterday or the other day, so I tidied up. Well, when I say tidied up my flat, organised it a bit better. I actually had to go through some boxes and bags, but I found some of my Phil Tufnell books on cricket and the Ashes and the funny. He's made a good career in the media. He, for me, is one of those few ex-pro sportsman success stories, and very few of them make it like that. It's like Dion Dublin with is it Escape to the Country or the property program he does? It's like Fashanu with Gladiators back in the 90s, the Wimbledon Fashanu, not the Norwich City Fashanu brother. It was the other one. Was it Justin or the other Fashanu? I can't remember which Fashanu died and which one's alive, but one of the Fashanu brothers did Gladiators alongside Eureka Johnson. Gary Lineker's obviously gone on and hosted. He's been on various programs, but obviously hosts Match of the Day now and the BBC football coverage. But people did have a go at Gary Lineker and really... actually, Phil Tufnell was quite an interesting character because he could field a little bit, he could bat a little bit when he wanted to. It was all a question of getting him on the right day. I've got loads of his books and I've looked at his stats. His fielding stats aren't as bad as made out. His batting stats, again, aren't as bad as some tail enders are. But he was a bit of a larrikin. But I do think Phil Tufnell, I think, gets a bad rep for some of his larrikin antics in the 90s when he was a young player. But he was his school captain, and if you can't bat and field, you don't become school captain. And he was quite a good youth player before he gets to county level status, first class and test status. He was actually quite a good youth player. Devon Malcolm. There's been quite a few who've been horrendous in the field. Regardless if they're a good batsman, good all-rounder or good bowler, there's been some players who just cannot field. And there are some players who just cannot bowl and some players who cannot bat. But if you're a mixture of all three, I don't know how you can make a side in general. You've got to be able to do something. But no, Phil Tufnell, he was a bit of a comical character because there's one, I forget which test match it is, but he comes out and he's meant to be night watchman. And Atherton's been bowled. There's only a few overs left of the day's play. Tuff has just run on. I can't remember if it's overseas or a home test series, but he's run on the pitch. He's left the pavilion. He's been told you're night watchman. Anything happens before end of play with 3 or 4 overs left, any wickets fall, you're going out to the crease. You're going to be batting at 3 or 4 as night watchman if anything happens. And of course, he sat up in the pavilion, and Atherton's bowled. Atherton's out, and he's got to run down, and he runs down, and Athers goes, "Where the fuck's your bat?" And he went, "I don't know, where is my bat?" And he completely forgot his bat because he had a cheeky spice roll up. He had a bit of devil's lettuce, and he was actually stoned. And he had a few bevies, and he was pissed and stoned. And it's a true story. And he forgot his bat because he was a little bit blotto. And Atherton went, "Oh, here you go, use this one. It's my spare. Just don't break it." And he survived the rest of the day's play and survived for a couple of overs the following day in the test match. And I think England went on to win the test match. But he had obviously half out, not expecting to come on, and he'd run on and he'd left his bat. And I think he also left his helmet up in the pavilion as well. That's a funny one. But you can't do that now. Like, you cannot do that now. Monty Panesar was a character, but for the wrong reasons. Monty Panesar always came across as a bit of a tool. You could definitely tell with a player that, like a David Warner, they're just not likable characters. There's larrikins, and then there's, okay, you just get out. You're negative for this team. You're negative for the sport. We don't want to play with you. And David Warner gives me that vibe always. But David Warner has come across as we know about David Warner and his wife, and how he was so toxic for Australia and Sheffield Shield and his stateside, and every team he's played for hate David Warner. That's not to say David Warner isn't a really good player, as long as he keeps his sledging to himself and sledges himself. His batting and fielding, there is no one better than David Warner on his day. On his day, David Warner could be the most destructive batsman and one of the best fielders you could have in your side. It's just everything else that goes with David Warner. Are you winning in the right way? Is it actually, is this win at all cost culture really positive for the other players playing with him and against him? No. It turned out that he actually was quite a nasty piece of work. And then he's trying to, plead for sympathy in the media and social media, and his wife is really the one who's in charge of that relationship. It turns out she's a toxic piece of work as well, and they've thrown multiple players under, and no one likes him. He's the most hated sportsman in Australia. It's very hard for an Australian sportsman to be hated by Australians when he's playing for them. There are some who are very divisive characters who do get their fair share of dislike, but the whole nation pretty much going, "You're a dick." In Australia, hard to do. You've got to be really bad. You're watching the Olympics. A bit of the Olympics. I want to see, because the problem is I've obviously got my day job, and there is going to be clashes where I'm not going to be able to watch every single event, which is a problem. But I want to see the football. I want to see the rugby sevens, and actually I want to watch the golf. Ironically, I want to watch the golf competition, because I think golf as an Olympic sport has actually worked really, really well. No jokes. I think it's worked really well. And people are, golf and Olympic sport, it's worked really well. Rugby's worked really well. And the under 23s, I think that's worked quite well. The football has always, for me, I've always enjoyed watching the Olympic football. You'll get to see some players who otherwise won't make it into, the Euros, the Copa America, World Cup squads, and you'll see them playing. And like, that's actually quite a good player. He might be 19, 20. He's quite a good player. I'll try and watch as much as I can, but it'll mostly be all the evening session. So I will miss a lot of gold medals. I will miss a lot of the finals in various things, but I'll try and watch what I can. Field hockey is another sport I want to watch at the Olympics. Field hockey, GB always have a very strong side. Both men's and women's always have a strong shout to win something, medal there. The rowing, ironically, I'm going to be up at Eton Dorney tomorrow, actually walking past Eton Dorney, one of these Olympic venues from 2012. My friend's parents' house is literally a stone's throw from Eton Dorney, and where I'm going to be walking up the Thames Path between Windsor and Eton and Maidenhead, you have to walk past Eton Dorney. So I will be going past there tomorrow. I might actually take some photographs of Eton Dorney. And post them to the channel. I'm here today, but I'm only walking past it. I'm not actually going into it, Dorney. You have to obviously have an appointment. You have to have a reason to go in there. So I'm not, because they shut off one of the footpaths a couple of years ago because there was vandalism and during COVID and all that. So you couldn't actually go on some of the footpaths, which was a shame because they actually do help you get to local stores and to the Jubilee River and other places where you can do some boating. There's a footpath that goes down the Jubilee River. They closed all that off for a good year or so because of vandalism and local yobs just being local yobs and vandalising and ruining basically and damaging the facility, which costs money. What volleyball controversy? There's things happening in volleyball. Volleyball, really? A sport that's not sexist whatsoever. What's happening in the volleyball? I haven't really. I literally yesterday I just decided not to watch the last two games at the Euros. I decided no, what, I'm not watching the Czech game, Turkey game. I'm not watching the Portugal Georgia game. I just need an early night because I went with my mum to have a nice pub lunch today at a pub that we used to go to when I was a kid, and my parents used to live right by. And we hadn't been there for a long time, and they've completely refurbed it, and it just looks amazing. Oh, I had the best double cheeseburger. Yeah, a little bit. I actually stupidly decided to watch the 12 hours of Sebring from 2024 again in full. And I tried to watch last year's 12 hours of Sebring last night and this morning as well, just to have it on the background. And I got 9.5 hours through it before falling asleep. So I've done basically 24 hours of endurance motor racing in a day and a half. So yeah, I'm a little bit exhausted, but I just love my IMSA series, as I said in that video the other day. I watched the 6 hours of the Glen the other day, and I was like jaw struck by some of the driving standards being good, B, some of the driving standards being, oh Jesus Christ, they gave you a license? No. But no, I've happily. What was it? Was it this year or was it last year or the year before? There was one year I sat through the whole 24 hours of Daytona. And I did 3 years consecutively watching the 24 hours of Le Mans. That was all the 24 hours of Daytona I did since post COVID, and the 24 hours of Le Mans I did pre-COVID. So there was definitely 2 years back to back where I watched the whole race. And I was sort of living with a mate, and he was like, "Are you still watching this?" And I had a cigarette hanging out, and I was on my 12th energy drink, and I went, "There's only 6 hours left." And yeah, I will happily sit through the 24 hours of Le Mans. I will happily do the 24 hours of Daytona. You just give me enough caffeine and enough nicotine, and I will sit through the whole thing. I've obviously, where my flat, I don't smoke cigarettes inside my flat anymore, but I've got my back door just there, and because my new laptop so much better than the old one, speakers are louder. The picture quality, obviously, as you can now see with me, is a lot better, a lot crisper. As I say, the inbuilt speakers are better. Don't need to get the headset. Don't need to get my old speakers out. Leave the window slightly open. Stand on the porch. I could have a cigarette and a cup of tea, and I can hear everything. And so I don't have to go, did I miss something? And if there is a yellow flag, I'm back in. Yeah, okay, he's right. They got the replay. He's piled up. And yeah, I could happily watch the whole 24 hours of Le Mans, 24 hours of Daytona. I did the whole 12 hours of Sebring this year. And last year, and I did the 8 hours of Sebring last year, and I did the whole Petit Le Mans last year and the year before, which is a 10-hour race. Yeah, I can easily do that. That's piddle. because it's just one event. It's not like, right, watch football, hour break, get video, do match review, blah, 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 or get in from work, get ready, football on, watch the game, match review, then try and get changed, have dinner, get ready for the next game, get the notepad written. Because, for example, so this is my current notebook. So the first video I did in the current notebook was the FA Cup fourth round, Ipswich losing to Maidstone. I don't know if you can see that, Maidstone Town, right? So that was back in January, mid-January. And then Newcastle beating Fulham and Wolves beating West Brom. And then we had Liverpool, Norwich, Manchester United, Newport County, I think I fell asleep. And then Blackburn beating Wrexham. I watched that one. And that was the best I've seen us play for a long time. How we nearly got relegated this season is beyond me. And then, the Six Nations and the fourth round replay, Plymouth, Leeds, and Villa, Chelsea. Did them, and then Six Nations. So we're talking February, March time, and now we've got look at this. I mean, this is just so you've got Brad Arthur getting sacked, Europa League final, and then you've got all the club football histories from like Cork City. So literally, I go through. I've got four. Well, where is it? I've got a notebook up there somewhere. I've got 3 from the last year and a half down there alone. So I'm on my 4th notebook in less than a year, basically, a year and a half. I've got 3 more down there, and that's just with YouTube notes. That's just YouTube notes. That's insane. Actually, I did all the director's cuts of the Lord of the Rings with the added deleted scenes box set in a day. That is about 16 hours. And what's the most I've done in a day? I did the entire Chicago PD seasons 1 to 5 in 2.5 days. That's literally not sleeping, so I can do it. I just choose not to, but I can. So I don't need that one in my phone because I'm going to check. So what's actually happening in netball? What's actually happening in netball? Is it netball or volleyball? Volleyball. What's actually happened in volleyball that's so controversial and negative? Because obviously the build up to this Olympics has been controversial. I haven't watched episodes 7, 8, and 9 because I stopped watching Star Wars when I was a kid. I stopped caring about Star Wars about the Phantom Menace because the other 2 in the prequel trilogy are crap. And I'm not going to lie, the latest Indiana Jones film was just why, and they're now about to release Beverly Hills Cop 4. The 3rd one sucked. So film is. So I'm just going to quickly find out what's going on with this volleyball controversy because I do think it's very, very interesting. No, so I just want to double check because trust me, Bob, if it's bad, I'll say this. But what? Okay, so it's Dutch. So it's a Dutch volleyball controversy. Okay, so right. Delving into the interwebs. For some reason my phone is really being really slow at the moment, which is really annoying me. Volley. Oh, why? Well, apparently I can't spell volley. So volleyball. Now, Volleygate, right? Is it? How would I go? Right, Dutch volleyball Olympics, the team, the league. I mean, is it to do with the Olympic program? Is it to do with the national side? Oh God. Okay, now that's just gone weird. So I've right. So I'm on the search. This for some reason. So Volleygate. Okay. So it's the Dutch volleyball. And we'll go with news. We're just going to go with news. So I'm going to keep it safe. Sent to jail for Oh, I see. Oh dear. Okay, so that's we're not going to discuss that. That's awkward for the Dutch Volleyball Association and their Olympic Committee to explain why that's happened. I don't look, as I say, look, what are they thinking? I don't know the Dutch legal system, and I'm not sure if we have many Dutch viewers, honestly. But any criminal conviction, I think, is awkward, especially because we've seen obviously what happened with Mason Greenwood and how he wasn't convicted. However, he's not technically been proven innocent yet. The case has been suspended, investigated, but it hasn't been dropped completely. It's on file. So he hasn't been told by the police he's got a caution, or he's been told case dropped. But clogs. Well, no, you'll be surprised. I've been looking at where people are viewing from on channel viewership, and I found it very, very interesting that I've had an explosion of growth in viewers from Asia, in the subcontinent and Southeast Asia. A lot of new viewers from countries that I wouldn't expect viewers to be from, considering the sports that we discuss. And how the growth in the US is just dried up. But no, you'll be surprised. I've had viewers from all over the world, and I regularly go back and I check. But in regards to the Dutch situation, now again, I don't understand the Dutch legal system. I would not know anything about the Dutch legal system, and I wouldn't expect anyone in the chat to be a lawyer or anything like that. I wouldn't. But that is a PR nightmare. That is now going to be a nightmare for that team, the Dutch selectors, the Dutch Olympic Association, the Dutch Volleyball Federation. That's going to be a nightmare from the top to the bottom. And it's going to create an unnecessary media cycle surrounding the situation. Now, again, what constitutes his offence and what he's been alleged or found guilty of, or whatever, if there's an appeals process, I'm not going to delve into that. It's come out. Notice it's always the right-wing media channels that seem to want to spout this crap about a country that doesn't involve us. Most of it's actually coming from British news outlets in regards to a Dutch situation that Dutch society needs to resolve. For me, I don't know the Dutch legal system and what is allowed and isn't allowed, and should he be prohibited from, even just training just to stay fit and healthy as a human being, and what is happening. Holland's a weird country. There's a lot of laws in Holland that I don't agree with, and there's a lot of laws in Holland that I do agree with, and then there's things in Holland that I just don't understand why they have these things. The Dutch is because here's the thing, you can actually legally possess what we would class as Class A drugs and not get arrested for it. You can have, a certain amount of MDMA on your person, a certain amount of cocaine on your person, a certain amount of heroin on your person, and a certain amount of cannabis on your person legally, and the police cannot confiscate and or arrest you for it. Whereas here, you're caught with any of them, regardless of the amount, and if you say it's personal or whatever, you're getting a police record of some kind. So let that sink in. Let that sink in. You cannot smoke inside a cannabis cafe, but you can't smoke cannabis outside. So you can have a cigarette outside and get stoned inside. Make sense. You can have, I think is it 2 to 4 ecstasy tablets on you at any one time, not have them confiscated. You can have, I think, is it 2 grams of cocaine on you, and it won't get confiscated. And again, it's classed as personal, and you're just told to go on your way out of a public space. They really, while drug legislation is another thing. What's happened here? A, it's not worth discussing. B, that is an issue for the Dutch Olympic Federation, the Dutch Volleyball Association, and the Dutch legal system to resolve. I don't understand why the British toxic media is reporting on something that the Dutch society needs to have a hard look at itself, about its criminal justice system and who should and shouldn't be selected for an international squad. Yeah, the Dutch is a weird country because it's meant to be the most tolerant nation in Europe. Yeah, it's got some of the most racist football hooligans and most racist far-right parties going. And it's got some of the highest rates of, racial gang violence, where Arabs and African and Afro-Caribbean gangs regularly have violent gun battles and knife fights in urban areas. Same as Sweden. Sweden and Denmark, seeing these very liberal countries, very, very progressive, have some of the highest rates of gang violence in the Western world outside of like Little Rock, Arkansas. Like we're talking, some of the neighborhoods are exceptionally dangerous. But no, the Dutch is a weird country because, you know, like it's a very, very open society, but also you go down that wrong road, you ain't coming back. Like you go down the wrong corner on a street, you're in serious trouble. It's like France. France is a very interesting society as well, where some of the most beautiful architecture, great history. You go into a football stadium and you may end up with a beer bottle through your neck. Like you may not get out of that stadium alive. Some of the worst gang violence, and some districts and some cities, the police don't go in. They have to call the army in to remove gangsters and shoot them. Rotterdam is a massive port city. Any major port city is going to have high levels of crime and deprivation, which is borne out in how the football team is. Their football fans are pretty nasty. The Feyenoords, PSV, Eindhoven's another one because there's a lot. Even though Eindhoven's a beautiful city, it's on the Rhine, the Rhine Delta. All of the Dutch cities have these beautiful city centres, and then you go out the city centre and you're like, I don't think this is safe. Holland is the big cities in Holland are dangerous. People think they go there for the sex, the drugs, the rock and roll, the party lifestyle. And in reality, it's a very dangerous place. I've never met a Dutch person who's actually happy about Holland. Every Dutch person I've met has been over here. It's not over in Holland. It's not over in Europe. I've met every Dutch person I've met has been in the UK or somewhere else in Europe, and they're like, I'm so glad I'm in insert country or insert town here. I said, what's it like in Holland? Yeah, great. The last Dutch person I probably had a conversation with, I was in London. I was on Trafalgar Square, and this young lad, a couple of years younger than me, he was like, and he knew I was English because I was on the phone to a mate going, yeah, I'm up in London. I'm just sorting out a few bits and pieces. I had to take my cousin up to the Strand of Trafalgar Square because he had to go for one of his A-level exams. And it was an off-site exam because it was he was studying Italian and they didn't have enough students at school studying the language. So we had to go off-site to do it as a specialist to an exam place that was specialist. And this Dutch lad, must have been a year or two younger than me, was on a school exchange trip. And he was about 18, 19, so he was about a year or two younger than me, a high school student. And he was like, he came up to me and goes, excuse me. She's like, yes, can I, and I'm trying to do his accent really bad. He goes, excuse me, like, how do I get to this hotel? And I was like, well, I'm not actually from London myself. I'm here I said I'm here on business, basically. I had to go to London for I'm not here as a tourist. I'm not local, but I do know London, but I don't actually know where you're looking for. And he was like, I'm looking for the Savoy. It's back up there. Because they were doing a tour of the Savoy as part of their trip, and they were allowed to go off for an hour, and he got lost. And I was like, you're there. You buy it. Literally, I could walk you there. And he was like, what do you mean? He's like, don't get the underground from Covent Garden to Trafalgar Square or vice versa. It's actually quicker to walk than go down Trafalgar Square, get on the tube, Covent Garden. It takes you 5 minutes to get out of the station. It's quicker to walk. It's just there. I literally pointed to the hotel, and he looked at me and was like, I've got an hour to get there until I meet the rest of my, He goes, do you want a spliff? And I was like, yeah, this is not Holland. And I went, this is a different. And I said, where are you from? And he goes, oh, I'm from this little bit of Holland near Maastricht, but I have to go to school in Belgium because my village is too small. The town in Belgium across the border is bigger, so everyone in the village goes to school in Belgium because the population has dropped below a threshold. I'm like, what? But they all speak Dutch and German in that bit of Belgium. I was like, oh. So, but it was weird. It was just weird how this Dutch lad was like so casual about his drug use in public. He's like, I don't care. But yeah, it is what it is. So it was like a Turds Towns, Luton, Blackpool. That's gone downhill. Birmingham is just don't go out after 7 p.m. Bradford is don't go out at all. I wouldn't say Manchester's that bad. My mum goes up to Manchester used to go to Manchester quite regularly with work, and there's bits of Manchester she goes are actually quite nice, and then she still doesn't. Liverpool are actually quite nice. These are cities that have unfortunately got a reputation because of gang violence in the deprived areas of said cities. But there's some nice bits. Even Bradford's got nice bits. There's some nice historical buildings. Bradford. It's just a shame that the gang violence is unfortunately has taken over, and the deprivation and the poverty has taken over. And it's just a byproduct of deprivation, lack of job opportunity, and lack of investment. And it's borne out again with the sports teams. You look at Bradford Bulls and the financial issues they faced. They overspent money they didn't have in an area which the fans don't have a lot of disposable income, and they couldn't sustain themselves. There's a reason why the Bradford Bulls went up creek without paddle. There's a reason why, for example, there's issues with a lot of clubs especially up north, but even in like places like the West Country, and you would think, oh, these are quite wealthy areas. They're not. There's a reason why Worcester Warriors have gone bust. And yeah, there were some bad decisions made at boardroom level and financially. And you sit there and you go, this shouldn't be happening. Yeah, it's the same with any major city. You're going to get urban deprivation. You're going to get rough areas. That's just a given. That is literally just a given. There are some cities that have got huge areas of deprivation. Huge areas of deprivation. Who the hell's phoning me now? But there's huge areas of deprivation in almost every area. Literally, I mean, my block of flats isn't paradise, but literally around the corner from me, you've got houses worth several £1 million, and then around the corner, you've got some of the roughest housing you're ever going to see. I would say the demographic change of Bradford as well has changed things with rugby league team. Most of the people that live there did not watch rugby league or have any interest. Again, Bradford's an interesting one because it does have a university. It isn't a sporting area. There's a lot of professional athletes have come from that part of Yorkshire in a lot of different sports: cricket, rugby union, rugby league, football, and Yorkshire, Sheffield is a sporting city that draws people in as well, creates. Because there's the University of Sheffield, and they did a lot of investment in the late 80s, early 90s for the university games. And a lot of those facilities, while they're getting dated now, are still being upgraded and constantly used by the universities in Sheffield. And that becomes a sporting hotbed. It's the same with Manchester. There's been a lot of investment in Manchester sporting-wise since the Commonwealth Games back in 2002. And it's the same with where West Ham play now in that part of London. There's been a lot of investment. It's the same with a lot of areas. Like Bristol's had a lot of investment because of the ownership of the rugby union and football club being owned by the same ownership group, with Bristol City and Bristol Bears rugby club being owned by the same ownership group. And a lot of investment at Ashton Gate. So certain cities and certain towns have had a lot of investment in certain areas. But honestly, I think it's. We're going to keep politics out of it. In regards to the election, obviously the football regulator is the only thing that I can really think of that could potentially it could have an impact. I think the pressure is there now to have our professional sport better regulated. There's talk about the Six Nations potentially coming off the BBC because after 2025, and will ITV have enough money to keep it free to air because it's not one of those protected sporting broadcastings where it gets that grade A status for broadcasting. And there's been a big reaction to the potential of the Six Nations going behind a paywall. They did it with the England games for a few years between 97 and 2002. And then the RFU went, we've made a massive mistake. And we've lost a lot of viewers and it's not making us money. And people have voted with their viewing habits and gone, we're not. But again, the late 90s, early 2000s to now, the demographics have changed. Sports broadcasting has changed massively. You are so blocked. The fact you keep making up profiles is just, I give you that. I give you making up profiles. I really, really, really do give you props for that. You're a very, very persistent troll. You really are. But you see, the more you troll me, the bigger the algorithm picks up. So you're actually helping the channel, but you are just embarrassing yourself. I just find it funny, the persistence of this one troll. It's just hilarious how they're persisting. Like, all they're doing is actually helping the algorithm. And they've got to be subscribed for 20 minutes before they can actually leave a comment. So they've obviously set up several profiles. I have a rough idea who it is. And I believe it's a work colleague or several work colleagues. And to be honest, from what I can gather from work meetings and the potential for job cuts, yeah, I have a rough idea who it is. And you can just tell who the trolls actually are. But I have a rough idea who it is. Which is why I don't do live streams much anymore, because they just get ruined by absolute morons. And unfortunately, YouTube doesn't give you the tools that you really need. There's certain things in regards to what goes in. For some reason, some of my subscribers, some of their comments get put into the spam and they shouldn't be. And yet idiots like this, they just leave crap, which it makes it harder when it comes to actually going through the comment section and it is what it is. There's a reason why I don't share stuff on Facebook anymore, because of this exact reason. The last 12 months I have a rough idea who it is. Technically, if enough on the algorithm, see, look, they're still doing it. So, oh gods, and I know who it is, so it's fine. And don't worry, I actually know who it is, and I know their dad's a nonce, so that's going to be fun at work on Monday when I'm back at work. I know exactly who it is. In fact, I know it's the group of people it is as well. But I've been having this kind of crap from them for over a year, which is why I don't do live streams that often anymore, which is a problem because I actually like doing the live streams. I really do. But at the same time, why? They try and wind me up. Honestly, they're trying to wind me up. They've been doing it for a year and a half. They've made work really miserable. And there was a point where I needed to jump my job in. Yeah, I needed to quit my job because of what was happening, and management don't do fuck all. So, and it didn't help that I was going through a tough time where, like, two of my good friends had recently passed away. Had a family bereavement, and they doubled down on it. And I was just like, I've only had 3 days off to go to 3 funerals, and it just got crappy. And I think the worst one is when my mate John died of cancer. I think that was the worst one, and it was not long after that there was issues. And work were useless with it though. Work literally, they can say to you you're allowed to have you can put down, personal, funeral, medical, whatever. And they have been really crappy with a lot of people when it comes to funerals because and all that. And I got lucky to get 3 funerals off. One of them for a relative, two of them for close friends. But yeah, you just. Oh no! I work for a private contractor that's on behalf of a government council, and so no, that government and council work actually you'll find more union representation in the public sector, and yeah, that can be a bit of a. We've seen what's happened with strikes, and we've seen what's happened um, with a lot of things in regards to um, what we've seen in when you've got government contracts subcontracted out. Strike action has been an absolute pig's ear for like the last, well, since COVID, basically, since about 2021, 2022. You look at the railways, you look at buses, basically the public transport sector has been a mess. Border Force has been a mess. And the NHS has been a mess. Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, it is harder to get the sack from public sector. A lot harder, but not impossible. Not impossible. They're basically trying to clamp down on low productivity, and there's ways of doing it. And but again, it costs money. Costs a lot of money. Like I don't know how much it actually costs, for example, to go through litigation and stuff, but it's not cheap. It's not cheap. Like if an employee wants to go through a workplace tribunal, that can cost thousands, and it's cheaper just to make it go away by giving them a massive settlement. Ironically, because they can drag out a tribunal and they can drag out legal action against an employer or a fellow work colleague for a long time. And if you're unionised and you get that kind of support, the union can actually pay your legal fees if you're a union member. And so if you want to take a company or colleagues to court for a variety, or management to court, you really can, cost them a lot of money. And so that's where you get just out of court settlements. They go, we're going to pay you out. It's actually cheaper to pay you out a huge lump sum than to persist with ongoing legal action. Because in the end, if they may only have to pay you a small sum of money as in settlement, but the legal costs actually cost even more than just a lump sum they give you. But no, I've come across several instances of we've seen it in sport. The Bosman ruling, for example. The Bosman ruling obviously comes about because Mark Bosman isn't happy with either not being allowed to wind his contract down and go to another club. I think it was actually in Belgium, and it impacted his career. And people say with the Bosman ruling, if you decide to go down that route with the Bosman ruling, that your career's done and no club will want to touch you because for whatever reason. But this is, I think, another problem is the Bosman ruling is actually a good thing. Unfortunately, clubs don't like it when players actually know what was going on with contracts and stand up for themselves. Because Mark Bosman, I think, represented himself and didn't want to use an agent, I think. And it basically ended up that he wasn't happy. I'll have to look into the Bosman ruling and what it actually means. And basically, he wanted to go and change club. And he wanted to change club. He wasn't happy with the contract he was being offered as an extension at the club he was at. And he wanted to leave his club in Belgium and go to another. Yeah, I can't remember. I'll have to look at it. And he was a decent player, Mark Bosman. He wasn't a bad player. After that, his career suffered. It really suffered. And the clubs involved, the club that he was under contract basically were like, yeah, we're going to basically, they tried to smear him basically as difficult to work with and as unprofessional and all these things. And in the end, yeah, it did damage his career. But yeah, the Bosman ruling itself is like free agency in the NHL or Major League Baseball or the NBA or all these pro leagues over in the US, and it's also free. When a player signs for a free, it makes it easier now for a player to go, I don't want to be transfer listed. I refuse to sign for this club. Basically, it's a good thing that the Bosman ruling exists. It's like the PFA. It's a good thing that the Players Association exists. And we could always argue, Jimmy Hill, with him arguing to get rid of the upper wage cap for players in 1968. Actually, the intentions at the time were the right intentions. It has benefited the players. But the Bosman ruling doesn't come in until 1995. I think it went to the employment court in Brussels, I think it actually went to the highest court in Europe for employment law. And it actually became law that an employee, in this case a football player, can say, I refuse to transfer to another club. I want to choose the club that potentially I can have discussions with about a contract, be it a contract extension here or a transfer there. I get to choose where I get to go. I have some say. But I can always look into the Bosman ruling and what led to it and what the outcomes were and how it impacted professional football. But the impacts are exactly the same with free agency. Like free agency in the NHL, next Monday is free agency. So all these players that are winding down their contracts and debating about contract extensions and negotiations, they will just go to the free agent market. Now, their current team may re-sign them, but that now means that the negotiations, can go in the players' favour. It can change their contract clauses where, like, they haven't got a no trade clause now. They may want to get out. They may want to go, actually make it easier to trade me. I'm not happy with. Free agency is the same thing as the Bosman ruling, basically. It gives a bit more control to the player. It doesn't necessarily give all the cards to the player. Ironically, it can go against them. But if a player invokes the Bosman ruling, it rarely happens for a reason. It means the player has more say in their contract, and if they get loaned out, if who they signed for, how much they signed for, etc., etc. But it's an interesting one. Let's have a look at that. It is an interesting one. I'm not saying it's a perfect system. I'm not saying it's a system that is going to work all the time. They had a contract before free agency, and they're basically structuring their contracts on a more North American contract style. That's basically what I'm getting at. Is they are structuring their contracts. It's an American style contract. Well, the NRL to go to a 20-team competition. I'm not against a 20-team competition. I think it's bound to happen. They're in competition, obviously, with the with the AFL to be the biggest league domestically in Australia, but of course they've got a team in New Zealand. I haven't read too much into it. I know that the plan is that to get that 18th team in within the next 2 years. I know they are very, very keen on Perth. They've gone lukewarm on Papua New Guinea. They've gone a little bit lukewarm on Central Coast. They've gone a bit lukewarm on another team in Queensland and in the south. It looks very likely Perth is going to be team 18. Whether they have that North Sydney Bears or Ipswich Jets kind of link as the junior base, and maybe take a couple of games there, just say thank you to the team that went before. So it's an interesting one in that regards, and B, grow the game. The women's game backs that up. I mean, I was watching the first half of women's game 3 State of Origin before I went out today, and the growth. Look at the crowd at Queensland Country Bank Stadium for a women's State of Origin decider. You didn't get pre-2018. So the growth in the women's game is there. The growth in the game is there. The crowd numbers have been really good. Taking the games to Vegas, I think, actually added more internal focus in Australia and New Zealand on the product, but also got people talking in North America. So people say it's going to dilute the product. In the short term, yes, there will be a quality dilution for a year or two or a decade. Eventually, it's going to obviously clearly positively impact the money that they can get from the TV deal. which means more money. Which means more money can go into the clubs that can go into then growing the grassroots game with the catchment areas. There's enough. There's enough. There's enough players in Western Australia where you could probably, after a good 4 to 5 years, have a pretty decent system of pathways and growth and getting it in the schools and getting it in communities to actually start having some pretty positive growth. The AFL is well entrenched in Perth. So they need to get in there and get their own entrenchment in, considering that rugby union is starting to struggle with the Melbourne Rebels going belly up and rugby union on its knees in Australia. It's vital. This is where I find it funny that they actually have struggled in the state of Victoria to really grow the game. Considering the Melbourne Storm have been there since 98 and Western Australia hasn't had a side for over 25 years. But I haven't really been following the NRL for the last couple of weeks while the Euros have been on. My focus is obviously, I've been a bit divided, which is a shame. So my focus has been a little bit distracted by the Euros. But at the same token, I do think that they have now obviously laid out their plan for growth and their roadmap, which I don't think they had before. When the Dolphins came in, I don't think they'd fully, clearly and transparently laid out their roadmap. Now that we see that roadmap, and I will obviously look at what the roadmap is and the pathway they want, they're making a statement of intent that within 9 years, this is what we want within the next decade. We want this achieved within the next 8 to 9 years. This is what we want. So that gives timeframes now. That gives timeframes for the corporate money to come in, ownership bids to come in of people wanting to buy in as an ownership stake, sponsors, and it also gives an idea to the TV, the media, be it social media companies, YouTube, sponsors, streaming services, the mainstream media. Well, this is what our plan is. Come up with the media bundle that our partners like KO Sports, Fox Sports, Channel 9, Channel 7, Channel 10, going through all the Australian networks now that I know of, Win Network, whatever the networks may be. Here's what we've got. Come up with an offer that can match each broadcast deal. We're going to grow the product. Let's see how much money because they're going to want to broadcast this. And even the buy rounds just don't work. An on-team competition doesn't work. We need that 18th team as soon as possible. And I can see it coming in when the next broadcast deal's starting. I can see the next broadcast deal being agreed, and they want the new team in, most likely Perth, by 2020. Is it 2025, 2026? When the broadcast deal's up, they want that team in place, playing games in the next 12 to 18 months, something like that. Like on the ground running with a team, with a junior base starting to grow with a reserve grade team. This is why I find it funny that Melbourne's reserve grade team is in the Queensland Cup and not in Melbourne and in the New South Wales Cup. I find that really bizarre that Melbourne, their junior pathways are basically in the state of Queensland and northern New South Wales. I just find that odd. I find that really odd that they're not trying to grow the grassroots game in the state of Victoria, because not everyone in Melbourne, in Geelong, wants to play AFL. That's the fact. It's fact of life. Not everyone in Melbourne and Geelong wants to be an AFL player, because you look at the demographics of Melbourne and Geelong, they changed massively since 1998. They've changed massively since before the Super League War. There's a big Balkan community. There's a big Italian community in Melbourne. There's a big Greek community in Melbourne. There's a big, basically the Adriatic. Basically every country that has a coastline on the Adriatic is in Melbourne. There's a big Cypriot community. There's a big Turkish community. So basically the Eastern Mediterranean is Melbourne. And there's a big African community as well. There's a lot of Africans from sub-Saharan Africa and tropical Africa, again, in Melbourne. Melbourne is a very multicultural city, and it's had different waves of immigration, and it doesn't suit the AFL dynamic. And rugby league's like, well, let's try and connect with these communities and say, we give you this. This is different. It's a different game. It's a bit more structured. It different origins. But Melbourne's an interesting city. But I do find it interesting that the state of Victoria is not picking up on rugby league as much, and they haven't really grown the grassroots game there. Yet Western Australia hasn't had a professional team in the NRL for over 20 odd years, and they've got more registered players and a population that's a fraction of the size of Victoria. Fraction. You could fit the entire population of Western Australia in Melbourne and have room to spare. So I've got more registered players and a far higher quality state league, more schools playing, more bush footy, pathways already there. There's players who were born in Western Australia who are playing in the NRL right now, actually born, raised, played some games, are now playing in the NRL. You don't have that. That's what I'm trying to figure out. And again, that comes down to the NRL and encouraging growth of the grassroots game by having meetings with state and regional governments and school boards and going, we want to get the game played in schools, get community groups and going, can we set up, clubs and give the grassroots club game structure? And it's the same with the AFL. The AFL is having this same kind of battle in trying to grow its product because Tasmania has become a mess in regards to their expansion plans within the same time frame. So it's interesting. But when we're talking about expansion and growing sports and growing leagues, the same thing is going to be said about Major League Baseball, the NFL, the NBA. The big one at the moment is the NHL because with the Utah situation where they've now got what was Arizona and the relocation, although it does actually feel like an expansion fee paid for a relocation, it just does. That now, there was an announcement made when the team was sold and relocated that in the next 5-year time frame, Arizona could reapply for an expansion team back in the Phoenix metro area. And the NHL has been very, very publicly open about having meetings with the ownership group in Houston, the 2 ownership groups in Atlanta, Kansas, even Omaha, Nebraska has had meetings as a city ownership group with the NHL. The Utah Jazz owner, who now owns the Utah Hockey Club, as it will be known for the next 12 months, was having meetings with the NHL before the COVID pandemic. So when we're talking about league expansion and direction of league expansion and all these other lovely things and growing leagues and growing products and what we would describe as expansion growth and the concern about diluting the product and what market you go in and is this the right location? Is this the right market? Are we targeting the right area? Is it a traditional market? Is it a non-traditional market? Every sport has had the same conversation. The Queensland Cup are a bit, or Melbourne. I think you could argue yes. I think they did have obviously their reserve grade side in Melbourne as well for a long time, and you could argue they're just we'll be in the Brisbane area, South Queensland, and we'll just wherever it is, wherever they place their team. I'm surprised they haven't put more focus in trying to grow the product in Melbourne, Geelong, and the rest of the state of Victoria. There are enough Queensland and New South Welsh transplants and even Kiwi transplants in the state of Victoria for work who would have come over with their families it's just a very interesting one, and they have definitely got their growth strategy apart from the Storm, and they do sell a lot of tickets. And they have a big fan base now in Melbourne, but they're not really going past just having fans. There's not enough. But because the AFL is now setting up successful teams in NRL heartlands on the East Coast. That is the difference. Is the AFL has been allowed into New South Wales and Queensland, and they're winning that battle domestically in Australia. Whereas the NRL is looking at Papua New Guinea and New Zealand as options for further expansion, and they're overlooking Western Australia. There's potentially reasons why South Australia wouldn't work, and Adelaide being not the best location for financial reasons. But they're overlooking they've been overlooking 2 major cities in Australia for decades. And that is Perth, that is Adelaide. They got it wrong before. I think the demographics and the finances are hugely different now. The economy is different. Everything's different now than what it was, during the Super League war in the mid to late 90s, early 2000s. The economics have changed, the demographics have changed, but the same principle remains: is they screwed up Adelaide, they screwed up Western Australia and Perth. When the away teams, like, travel is being paid for by Perth and Adelaide, when they're paying for the away teams' travel and accommodation, that's going to kill them, especially when you're trying to grow the product in a new market where you're not sure what's going to happen. There's unstable finances in the sport. The Super League war was a disaster for rugby league, absolute disaster. It had knock-on impacts this side of the globe, let alone down under. It was an absolute disaster. Quite frankly, caused a lot of harm to the sport, not only at the professional level, but also at the grassroots level. And we're seeing this repeated in other sports right now. We are seeing it repeated in golf with the LIV Golf, against the PGA and the DP World Tour. We're seeing it in golf. We've seen it in ice hockey on multiple occasions, most notably with the WHA and the NHL in the 70s, although the IHL was similar but different and failed for different reasons. And we've seen it with the European Super League idea with football to go against UEFA and the Champions League. And we've seen how damaging these unnecessary power grabs are, whether it's the people financing, like the club owners or the broadcast people, or it generally comes down to money and who's going to offer more money for contracts to players. Now, again, we have issues in boxing. The whole thing is from top to bottom an absolute shambles, quite frankly, absolute shambles in a lot of sports, and it's a mess. And when you get to that stage, the knock-on impacts are being felt today. There's a reason why North Sydney aren't an NRL team. There's a reason why Perth and Adelaide don't have NRL teams. There's a reason why we have a joint venture with the West Tigers and St George Illawarra, why they are joint ventures. And so I'm just sending a message to a friend. But there's a reason why rival leagues, when they're set up in the same sport, generally challenge the status quo, but ultimately fail and then leave massive financial consequences, not only in the teams that have signed up for that league that end up getting absorbed by the league that wins, which is the established league, but then they have financial knock-on impacts. And it was the NRL went through what the NHL went through in the 80s, in the 90s, and into the 2000s. It had massive issues at community level. It divided communities, which and that impacts a lot of things. People have had to leave communities because they chose the wrong team. It did have a lot of social impacts, and of course, it's impacted what we see now with player wages, the TV deal, or the media rights deal, and player contracts and how they're structured, salary cap, all sorts of things, negatively and positively, have been impacted since then. But the consequences were long lasting, and were quite damaging to the league for a long time. And out of that, we get the Melbourne Storm. The Melbourne Storm is the ugly love child of the collapse of the end of the Super League war. And whether you love or hate the Melbourne Storm, and people have their views on the salary cap scandal and some of the controversies surrounding the Melbourne Storm, there's no doubt they've been a very successful side and they have a very good winning culture. Whether you agree with that culture or not, that is a separate debate. But their culture, the no dickhead policy, for example, well, I think there's going to come a point where when Craig Bellamy does eventually decide to retire from coaching, it's going to be like Alex Ferguson at Manchester United. I do think they're going to go through a very, very tough transition period and a big shock. I don't think the Melbourne Storm are actually got a succession plan, because there's a reason why he keeps extending. There's a reason why every season. It's always had this debate about his contract, and you know, what's going to happen. Is he going to go another year? And ultimately, and whether we agree with how they've structured his contract, and it, making it like a rolling contract where there's a consultancy role in there where he will still be involved with the club after he decides to stop coaching. I mean, that's a completely open-ended thing. But it's interesting to look at. I think the way I think it is a shame that they're not developing the sport in a better way within state of Victoria. But I think some of the New South Wales clubs could do better with their player development, and some of the Queensland clubs as well. I think Brisbane had it easy for too long, and now you've got, you know, two other clubs in southern Queensland that they've got to compete with for player base. They're finding it harder to be successful now that other clubs are also in competition for the junior player base. And the fact that Melbourne have pinched a fair few players from under their noses as well makes me laugh. But it's the same kind of arguments that have been had in any sport about, you know, youth development, grassroots funding, engagement with the governing body and the sport and clubs and like schools and colleges and universities, trying to support the grassroots game, facilities, investment in facilities, you know, investment in infrastructure, investment in you know, the domestic, you know, local leagues. So I think that grassroots league structures, you know, prize money, getting enough people in for coaching and administration and volunteering. This is where a lot of the big top professional leagues and professional sport around the world need to do more in order to adequately and positively grow the amateur side and the grassroots side, from youth sports all the way up to senior level, in growth and structure and assistance. Because not only are you building fans for the future, you're building players for the future. You're building coaches for the future, referees, you know, administrators. You're growing that interest by giving them not only the professional team to support, but also their local team to play for and engage with, and community engagement, when not every fan can afford to go to the big smoke to watch their team play. You know, their engagement with the sport might be on TV, and then playing on the Sunday down the local playing field with all the age grades playing. That could be their engagement with the sport. And I do think there's not enough money reaching the grassroots level from top level professional sport, be it through the TV deal, you know, or other forms of income and revenue stream that professional sport generates. I just don't think sometimes that we do have the correct amount of the trickle down economics. Just doesn't work, basically. And we've seen over a very, very long time, that trickle down economics doesn't work, and that we've seen arguments over, you know, the revenue sharing of TV deals in professional leagues. The Football League, for example, and the Premier League, the funding model and the sharing of the revenue is just an absolute farce. The parachute payments is a farce. You look at the teams that got promoted this season, all of them, apart from Ipswich getting promoted actually saved the Premier League parachute payment money to actually save them money. Southampton getting promoted saved the Premier League money. Ipswich getting promoted saved the Premier League some money. Because they didn't qualify for parachute payments because they haven't been a Premier League club for over 2 decades. But the way a lot of things are structured, the way professional sport is governed, the way a lot of things are dealt with and structured, and and laid out, and it is a mess, quite frankly. It is a mess, quite frankly, and honestly, we could and should do a lot better in regards to development of players, development of grassroots facilities, funding for grassroots sport, be it through professional leagues, central government, governing bodies, sponsorship deals, and yeah, I mean, professional sport, unfortunately, the top end talent gets paid too much, and not enough of that revenue is fairly and properly distributed in the correct places. And we see that in the NRL. We see that grassroots rugby league is in a terrible mess, not just in Australia and New Zealand, but over here. It's in a terrible mess. Grassroots rugby union is in an even worse mess. Same with the AFL and Aussie rules. It's not going as well as people think it is. And the costs of equipment and maintaining facilities and people giving up their time for nothing. I mean, there's a reason why certain sports do struggle at grassroots level, and ultimately that has a knock-on impact for match day officials, administrators, non-playing staffs. That could be in the clubhouse, in the club, bar, restaurant, all the way down to the kit boy or the tea lady. We're talking club shop. It doesn't matter what level you're playing at, being an amateur, semi-pro, professional. The lower levels are not getting the right amount of funding, and there's too much money held up in a very small percentage of leagues where the top end talent is massive. I mean, rugby league is the prime example, right? And I go back to 2019, and I know we've discussed this at length in regards to Augustine Pichot, Bill Beaumont, and that World Rugby election for who was going to be in charge of World Rugby for the next cycle. Bill Beaumont obviously wins, and Augustine Pichot was like, nothing's going to change. And in the end, the pandemic forced the change that Pichot was arguing for, but the way they've gone about the change is the whole wrong way. And since then, we've seen countless teams go bust. And the club game is in real financial peril. And we've even now got high profile All Blacks players going, we need the South African teams back in Super Rugby. We made a terrible mistake. Unfortunately, the relationship was already broken long before Super Rugby, as it was, collapsed. There was a lot of mistrust between the South African Union and Australia and New Zealand. And by the time they became friends, the South African Union were like, we're going to join the European competitions. There's not enough money here. You're making terrible mistakes. And Super Rugby ultimately went belly up, and Rugby Australia are in a mess. And even New Zealand is in a mess. And then when you've got players who are All Blacks, high-profile rugby union players in New Zealand going, we need the South African teams back. Super Rugby is not the same. We're not doing as well. Not making as much money. The grass ain't always greener. The grass is not always greener, and the South African sides being involved in the URC, as formerly the Pro League, now known as the URC, are doing really, really well. And it's benefited them. They've won back-to-back World Cups. They're very consistent now. They are the best team in the world. The All Blacks aren't the All Blacks anymore. They're not scary to anyone anymore. They are human, and losing that competition between the South African players at club level and the Kiwi players at club level, and Australia has actually definitely had a knock-on impact where Australia are useless and New Zealand are very, very beatable and are not seen as scary for test sides anymore. South Africa's only got stronger by leading Super Rugby. And you can see where mistakes were made. I don't know where club rugby union goes at the semi-pro and professional level below the international level, but it's not in a good state. It's not in a good state at all. I think the only professional club league that's actually doing okay, ironically, is in the US, and their national side didn't even make the World Cup. at the last tournament. But the US at club level, it's doing all right. It's growing at a decent pace, and the quality at club level is improving. It's going to be a time before the national side feels the benefit of that, and that's down to organisation between the union and Major League Rugby and Rugby USA or USA Rugby, whatever it is, and that's down to getting a good working relationship between the professional league and the national side. It's the same problem that the MLS has faced and the US Football Federation, USA Soccer has faced in regards to making the USA decent at international level in football, is because of their professional league structure being so different to every other league structure in the world, where it's a franchise-based model and no promotion relegation. The only other league that's similar is Australia, and it's completely different in the league structure and how the league works. It's getting that working relationship between the professional league, the national side, and then those players who play internationally, overseas, and in professional leagues outside of the US and Canada. That's the battle that international sport faces in the US when you're putting together the national side to play at World Championships and World Cups and international tournaments. Is, other than ice hockey and the NBA and baseball, your best players actually play outside the US, and you've got to have a. It does. Yeah, this is why I think Major League Soccer, for example, and association football has taken as long as it has to stabilise and grow and reach the grassroots level it's currently reaching, and the fact that the US is going to be hosting its second World Cup in 2 years' time and is currently hosting the Copa America right now, it's boding well. They're going to be hosting the Rugby Union World Cup soon as well. So the US is making the right moves in trying to entice and attract domestic fans to have a look at these other sports. I think they are making the right moves in order to do that, but it shouldn't just take getting a World Cup. I think they need to try and also improve the quality of their domestic competitions to improve, the quality of, what the fans domestically will see, because a lot of association football fans, soccer fans in the US and Canada will prefer to watch the Champions League and the UEFA competition. There are more people in the US watch the Champions League than the Premier League. And so they also need to get that kind of balance right, where that they need to get a really decent TV deal domestically that's either cheaper or more accessible for fans to access. And they need to try and attract some of their best players, some more decent players who are still at the peak of their powers from Europe to the US. And I do think with UEFA's new spending rules, we are going to see some decent quality players go over to the US because their clubs in Europe can't afford to pay their wages or keep them under their salary cap, kind of spending cap. Because of UEFA's new spending rules that are coming in, we are going to see a player, I wouldn't say exodus, but I think players who are still, I would say, younger than what Ibrahimovic was or Beckham, at a better level in their careers, where they've still got 5-10 years left at top level, leaving Europe and coming over to the US and Canada to play. Plus, the MLS is still expanding, which means they're going to have a diluted talent pool domestically, and they're going to look at these extra players coming over from European leagues to go, well, actually, we need players to fill out these squads. We're going to need as many players as possible. That the US leagues below the MLS aren't at a high enough standard to keep shutting it out. We don't want to dilute the product too much. Let's get as many Europeans over or European trained players or ex-players over as possible. And I do think we are going to see, when these new spending rules do become UEFA's rules, players looking at the MLS maybe 3-4 seasons earlier than they normally would currently to play, which means they're going to be at a higher level for longer and actually potentially benefit and entertain the fans, but also benefit the league by making the league that much better because these players are basically in their prime rather than winding down their careers for a payday. I'm not saying that's a perfect solution to the problems that the MLS faces, but it's a stopgap until the player development catches up and the growth, the game catches up from where things currently are at. But no, honestly, the US, I think, is in a really healthy state sports-wise. They've got the Cricket World Cup right now, the T20 Cricket World Cup right now. They're going to have a Football World Cup co-hosting, and they're going to have a Rugby World Cup, both men's and women's. So they've got a lot of international sport coming their way within the next 8 years, and they want to make a statement in all these sports. So I find that very interesting as well, and we'll see, obviously, what transpires in regards to the quality of the tournaments that we see, obviously, in the US in the coming decade. There's also been a lot of discussion around the playing surfaces. The Cricket World T20 World Cup we've seen, where been great, and there's been a lot of debate about the quality of the wickets that the batsmen and bowlers have had to play with and play on, and how that's impacted results and the quality of cricket we've seen. I just think, unfortunately, it's been overshadowed by the Copa America and the Euros. And of course, the US is hosting Copa America as a bit of a trial run for the World Cup. There's a reason why the US basically has been allowed to compete in Copa America and also host it. And it is a practice run for what we should expect to see in 2 years' time. I think that's a really great idea. They're hosting it, and it gives the US an idea of what it's actually like to host a major international tournament. Quite frankly, it's going to be really interesting to see long term if that continues to help grow football, association football in the US. But the fact that they're hosting the Copa America, again, I don't think that's getting enough attention over here because the Euros are on. The world sports media is split at the moment between the Euros, the Copa America, and the Copa America got some world-class players playing in it. Euros, I would think more American football fans may actually be watching the Euros than the Copa America. I don't know what the viewership figures are going to be like, but I do think it's a really good warm-up event for the US for the World Cup. Unfortunately, Canada and Mexico aren't hosting any games, but they're playing games there. They're not hosting any games, and I think that's a bit unfortunate for the US and Canada in regards to getting them also ready for the World Cup in 2026. But it's a good practice event for the US on an organisational basis to go, right, here's the Football World Cup. We've got this Cricket World Cup. We've got a Copa America. We've got to have a Football World Cup. And then 2 men's and women's Rugby World Cups. And I think there's an Olympics in there as well. So they're getting a lot of major sports events in a decade timeframe. And I think they're using some of these bidding for and hosting rights actually as test event for the next one. So they're seeing what works, what doesn't work, and having like multiple venues in multiple states and cities. It'll be kind of cool when we actually find out where they're going to host the Rugby Union Men's and Women's World Cup, where their games are going to be hosted. That'll be interesting. It's a shame that the Rugby League World Cup, which was meant to be hosted there next year, is not being hosted there now, because I think that would have been a lot of fun. I think that would have been a lot of fun, and where they would have hosted games. Considering it's either East Coast or West Coast. There's no Midwest. It's East and West Coast when it comes to sports like that. That would have been a lot of fun, seeing how they would have organised it and how the tournament would have panned out. But it's a shame. It's a shame. I know this has turned into a little bit more of a podcast. I would like to see some more questions and some more, topics that you want me to discuss. But to be honest, it's kind of nice having a break from the Euros for a couple of days. I mean, obviously, I'm going to talk about this in more depth. As I said at the beginning of the live stream, we were discussing how England had been booed by the fans, the press conferences. Clearly, there's a disconnect now between the fan base and Southgate, Holland. And I do think the moment where I think the players have tuned out is the Grealish situation. I do think this is a very divided squad, and I think Southgate's lost the dressing room. And I think it's the same with Belgium. I think it is the same with Belgium. That looks like a very divided squad, and we've had a lot of stories over the years with this Belgian golden generation about how divided that dressing room has been over a very long time. And I think it's borne out with how they're playing and the reaction to the squad by the performances by the fans. The Dutch and the French haven't performed well either, and there's definitely some of these teams at the Euros have massively underperformed. And there was a question earlier saying, "Oh, the quality of football is not as good as what it was a decade, 15, 20 years ago." And I constantly say I feel football was at its best between the mid-90s and about 2010, 2008. I think 95, 94, 95 till about 2008. I think that period is the best period for club and professional football because the goals per game hits an all-time low. By the end, it's going up to basically an all-time high in that period. The goal scoring went up. It stabilised, but was pretty much half a goal a game higher on average than what it was a decade earlier. And I do think you had so many quality players playing across Europe in all the leagues. Now, because of the UEFA coefficient and the changes to the club competitions, and how they completely UEFA have ruined them because they basically the clubs, 12 clubs basically in Europe, are now calling the shots basically, and UEFA cower to them. They pandered to them, and so a handful of clubs have helped UEFA. Well, UEFA have tried to keep those clubs on side by constantly rewarding these clubs, but even when they're having crap seasons. So they can't have crap seasons because they keep getting all this prize money and all this appearance fees and all that from UEFA competitions. And the UEFA coefficient works in such a way that if they do have a bad season, hang on a second, we'll give your league an extra qualifying place for Europe, so you don't miss out. So I do think UEFA have made a rod for their own back by weak governance and allowing the clubs we all know about, the Super League clubs, or a handful of clubs at the top end of certain leagues, too much power. And the same clubs keep coming up. And the more we find out about how these clubs operate and how they go about things, makes me hate the beautiful game a little bit more. I don't love it as much as I used to. I just don't like the direction the sport's been taken down, I would say, over the last 15, 20 years. It's not the same sport I used to watch as a kid. And I don't feel comfortable with the direction the club game has taken and the international game has taken. I think we have gone down a very slippery slope where the governing bodies are taking tournaments to countries who shouldn't have them for political reasons, let alone economic reasons. And there's got to be a lot of questions asked about how cozying up. I mean, bearing in mind, UEFA and FIFA and CONMEBOL and all these governing bodies are going to be not-for-profit organisations. Yet they're making massive revenues and they're spending a lot of money on things. And you're thinking, we're just there to govern the game. And some of the commercial deals they're signing and some of the sponsorship deals are raising a lot of eyebrows with a lot of people. And we've seen what happened at FIFA and we've seen what's happened at UEFA, and we've seen what's happened in CONCACAF, and we've seen what's happened in CONMEBOL. We've seen all these governing bodies, AFCON, and high-profile officials taking bribes and being corrupt and not. And when the players are representing their countries, not giving them their match fees and paying them, and just some really bizarre stuff going on, and you know, and I watched some of the FIFA documentaries, and I was stunned by how long this corruption was going on for. It was almost a known thing that, okay, backhander here, this is getting done. This is how we operate. And it got to a point where if you weren't corrupt, um, you basically didn't get any job promotion within the organisation, and you were overlooked for things, and then you were overlooked for tournaments. So if you were a rep from a country and you were trying to put together a bidding process, but you weren't corrupt, or you weren't taking the backhanded or willing to have dodgy discussions, your nation or nations got overlooked for tournaments. And famously, the England and the UK were constantly coming together to put forward packages to bid for World Cups. Like the last two World Cups, England have been in the bidding for. And this is not long after London obviously got the Olympic Games for 2012. And so they decided to put in a bid for 2018 and 2022, put two separate bids in. And what was really interesting is when Greg Dyke, who was chairman of the FA at the time, famously, even on record, said we had a budget for corruption and bribing people because that was the only way to grease the pole and get any traction in regards to the bidding process, was to bribe some people. And apparently their budget wasn't enough. We didn't have enough paper bags. And they set aside, as part of the bid process for 2018 and 2022, they set aside, I think it was something like £2-3 million for corruption. They actually set it aside. And he quite openly said, we had a budget where we had dodgy envelopes stuffed full of cash, actually full of notes of money to try and bribe people with. And they actually gave bribes to these people, hoping they would vote for them. And they goes, it wasn't enough. We should have had an extra like 26 million or 260 million to bribe. And it just sums up how corrupt the governance of sport is, because there's been similar things happening at the IOC. There's been similar things. F1, Flavio Briatore, Max Mosley. There's been some very interesting people in charge of the FIA, F1, Liberty Media, Bernie Ecclestone. When Bernie Ecclestone sold the rights to F1 to Liberty Media, he may or may not have paid all the tax he should have on that sale of the company. Because F1, from I think, was it 1980 to 2018? 2016? I know some of the TV packages in place and some of the regulations in place were Ecclestone sign-offs, but he didn't pay all the tax. As far I think he got involved with a tax scandal where he didn't pay all the tax he should have on his sale of F1 to Liberty Media. I think something dodgy happened there, and that was Bernie Ecclestone. And some of the agreements that he put in place have actually screwed over F1 now, which makes it, in my opinion, an unwatchable mess, because the regulations are a nightmare. And all those regs were signed off several years in advance under the old F1 ownership before Liberty Media made it worse. And now Liberty Media have brought into MotoGP and Dorna. And there's been a lot of discussions around Dorna and some of the things and workarounds that are favouring Spanish teams and Spanish riders and Spanish officials over everyone else. And there's been allegations of dodginess with Dorna, who've now sold a massive stake in MotoGP to Liberty Media. So if you are a fan of motorcycle Grand Prix racing, buy products, say hello to what F1 looks like. MotoGP is going to look like F1 in the structure of their championship, sprint races. They're going to completely change the structure of their season to basically mirror what F1 looks like. They're going to completely change the calendar, take more to the US, which I don't think the AMA are very happy about. I think the AMA superbikes are going to be like, we don't want MotoGP having 3-4 races a year here, because that's going to take away from our own fan base and our TV revenue and our sponsorship. We don't want that. It's like if Liberty Media got the FIA World Motocross Championship as well, the AMA would be, we're not having this, because the AMA has the AMA 250 and 450 motocross championships, and also has the American Superbikes and Support Series as well. In my opinion, I don't like the direction Liberty Media has taken F1, but Bernie Eccleston did sign a lot of agreements that, in my opinion, and my friend has just messaged me because they're watching this and they're saying I'm slandering him. I'm not. I do really appreciate the engineering, the drivers, the race engineers, the pit crews. Don't get me wrong, I love my motorsport. I love the jeopardy aspect of it. I love the engineering behind it, the speed, the risk. But unfortunately, when it comes to a governance side, and this is a major issue that the FIA and the FIM, which is the motorcycle branch of the FIA, so we're talking about the governance, the ACO, Liberty Media, Dorna with MotoGP, the AMA with motorcycle racing on dirt and on track in the US, BTCC and TOCA with touring cars here in the UK. All these governing bodies have made some real bad decisions when it comes to media rights, accessibility, regulation. There's a reason why British touring cars is losing a lot of viewers over the last 3-4 years, and it's to do with the regs. Honestly, they've made a mess of the regulations with the hybrid. Doesn't work. Whereas in IMSA and Le Mans with the hybrid, there's none of this push to pass crap. It's just there to assist and boost the engine within a torque threshold. I love the IMSA and Le Mans hypercar regs with the torque threshold and the torque sensors. I prefer the IMSA regs over Le Mans in regards to the car regulations, but I prefer the Le Mans safety car yellow flag regs over IMSA. If you could get the best of both, you would have the perfect endurance racing series. Honestly, you would have the perfect endurance racing series going. But I think IMSA edges it over Le Mans. And talking about, Le Mans, we mentioned it earlier. I decided to watch the 12 hours of Sebring this year's race again in full, and then I decided to watch last year's race in full again because I might have missed a lot of the second half of the race last year. So I decided to watch it again because why not? I do like the new hyperclass GTP prototype class they've got, but I did like the DPI. Sorry, the sound of those engines, and they were far lighter, so they were better in the corners. But no, I do think some of the motorsport regulations they've got wrong. I think the media rights they've got wrong. They need to get more free-to-air coverage back, or at least cheaper options of streaming and signing up. Because I do think that there is a way that you can make it more accessible. I do think F1 has lost a lot of traditional fans, and you could argue that the FIA and certain decisions made and certain regulations, and of course race directors and issues around Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen and some of their titles they've won and how they came about winning them, and it does. Was it Abu Dhabi a year or two ago where they completely, was it Marzi made an absolute calamity of things, and it backfired, and the FIA had to come out and go, this has gone wrong, and it wasn't a good look for a top level professional sport when there are questions over the governance and the application of rules that are in their rule book for a reason. That was badly handled. But then he leaves his role with the FIA and he got moved on. And then there's been a lot of issues, in my opinion. I'm not saying that I dislike F1. I just don't love it as much anymore because it's less accessible. When you haven't got a lot of spare cash and to pay for all these subscriptions, it's like I can't afford that. can't afford that. And I look at how much it costs to get some of these subscriptions, and I'm like, that is unaffordable, and not something that is something that I can afford to justify spending a lot of money on. It's just, unfortunately, fans are being priced out. And they're talking about Silverstone, and Silverstone saying, oh, because Max Verstappen's winning all the time, that's the reason why no one's buying tickets, or our ticket sales aren't very good. And then fans were like, no, you're ripping us off. You basically doubled the price in the space of 3 years. We can't afford it. So they've misread the room. And I found that quite interesting, is Silverstone's response to lower ticket sales this year, and what their statement said as the British Racing Drivers Club, the BRDC, I think it is, the British Racing Drivers Club, which Damon Hill is the face of, versus what the fans are actually saying, going, no, you're just ripping us off. That's why we're not buying tickets. And I've discussed ticket price at great length on the channel before, going, well, ticket price is a big thing when you have empty seats in stadiums and empty seats in grandstands, and ticket sales being down or not at the same level where they were. Because with Silverstone and their basic press statements, you've got to read the room. And I think the British Racing Drivers Club haven't read the room. They're basically saying, oh, because a British driver's not winning all the time and other British drivers aren't regularly getting podium, oh, it's because Max is winning all the time. No. A lot of British fans love Max Verstappen. I like Max Verstappen. I think he's a character, and I think he adds to the sport. I don't think I wouldn't say he's not a hate. Max Verstappen is a divisive individual, but I think he's good for the sport, and I don't mind. And he's like a father-son thing. His dad drove in F1. He's driving in F1. And I remember watching his dad drive for Benetton and having the most scary moment in a pit lane where his car engulfs him in flesh. And his dad had a very serious accident at the Ypres Rally where his car was a complete write-off, and he was lucky to walk away with no injuries. Good evening. How are you doing? Yes. No, the Copa America, it's really difficult because obviously there's a massive clash where normally, where we were talking about Copa Americas and all that, they don't clash with like AFCON and things like that. The Euros is this is the problem but I think it's a good practice tournament for the US for the World Cup. I do think it's a good practice tournament for the US for the World Cup in 2 years' time. I think that's one of the reasons why CONMEBOL were happy to invite Mexico, Canada, and the US to participate, because it's seen as that practice tournament for them, and to see how they're going to cope with a large number of fans from outside North America traveling to and from stadiums, and how it will work. So it's going to be a good practice for ticketing, stewarding, security, all the whole lot. Well, the lack of quality football in the final thirds. It depends on the team. It depends on the style of play. I do think the quality of football we're seeing is not the same as the quality of football in the 90s and the early 2000s. I've been saying that for 6-7 years, longer. I've been saying that a long time. I've been saying that I think the quality of what we're seeing in a lot of professional sports at international level is not the same as the 90s and 2000s, when players were still well paid, but paid a lot less. It's like, look, I've got nothing against Declan Rice doing his, yogurt adverts, because obviously his surname Rice, Muller Rice. I think they're actually quite good, and I think he obviously wants to make sure he's got, sets himself up for post-playing. But it reminds me of when a lot of England players did advertising campaigns in the build-up to the 2014 World Cup, and we didn't do very well. And we did really badly with Joe Hart, Sterling. There was a few others who did adverts in 2014 for Brazil, and we did really bad. And then 2018, there was a few more who did adverts, and we did better. But I find it interesting that Jack Grealish is doing his Hellman's advert. It gets broadcast. Day later, he's dropped from the squad, and everyone's going, "Well, this is not good." Considering how his part, I feel sorry for Grealish, but I do think, as I said earlier, I think the way that Southgate handled the squad going into the friendlies and into the tournament, and how the Grealish announcement was handled, the squad didn't take it very well. And the way the news was broken to the squad and the players who were dropped, apparently they didn't take it very well. They weren't given the right, correct. Basically, this England squad and this English Euros is reminding me of the 2015 Rugby Union World Cup when we were hosting with Stuart Lancaster. And I can see the exit interviews when the tournament's done and the FA want to review things, and they go through the coaching staff. Now, most likely Southgate's basically probably not going to be there 2 years' time or for the qualifying campaign. The exit interviews and the post-tournament process that we go through could be quite an eye-opener for the FA, because I think the FA have made a lot of errors in judgment in regards to not only giving him a contract extension before the last World Cup, but giving him a get-out clause where he could get out of that contract, but they've got to pay him out before this tournament kicked off. They extended him and gave him a get-out clause. No, I think the next World Cup, I think they've realised this is not working, and I think we've got more groups at the next World Cup. I think you'll see the structure of the World Cup in the next World Cup is different, and we won't see third place teams go through because it's a bigger tournament anyway. They've expanded it. So I actually think we may not see as many third place teams. I think they were going to say third place teams at the World Cup in the US, Canada, and Mexico. I think they're just going to make it a longer tournament and just have that extra round, and so you get rid of the third place teams. I think FIFA realised it didn't work when we had a 2014 one. Have they already? Oh God, 48 teams, 8 out of 12. Oh God, I can see this being a shambles. We'll see what happens in regards to who progresses and what goes on from there. But there's already been pushback from players' associations and some clubs against the Club World Cup they're bringing in for next year. We've seen pushback in regards to... they've already seen pushback in regards to this restructuring of UEFA club competitions. And fucking bug. Got him! Got the little bugger. It's now all over me. Sorry, I had bugs. That moth's been annoying me for about an hour. But no, there's been a lot of pushback from players' unions and the PFA clubs saying, nah, too many games now. Yet these same clubs, owners, are like, oh, we signed up for this. But the managers are going, no, actually, the managers' associations and the players are saying, hang on, stop. So while this European Super League idea is not going away, and Barcelona and Real Madrid have got a hard-on for basically taking on UEFA and being greedy, their actual players are not in favour of it. This is the funny thing. When the Super League idea came about 3 years ago, a lot of fans across the Atlantic thought, this is great, it's amazing. And then when they actually found out and understood more about the traditions and the community aspect and why our sporting culture is different, you now hear most younger fans suddenly turned against it, and most North American fans from the US, Canada are like, we've made a mistake here supporting this. And this is where the reports coming out of Wrexham wanting to play Birmingham City in the US, they're trying to shut that down quickly because that got leaked. And they were like, no, there's been no approach has been made to the EFL. And the EFL are like, it's not happening. And suddenly Wrexham's owners and Birmingham's owners, I think it was Birmingham's idea with their ownership, well, let's play some games in the US. You've just got your team relegated and went through like 3 managers in the season. No. Just no. I find it funny that 2 of the bigger nations like, we don't want this, but UEFA goes, money. And it's very interesting that FIFA and UEFA are meant to be non-for-profit organisations that have signed up massive amounts of sponsorship deals and are cozying up to some very interesting political figures. And yeah, but you want to have an easier path through to the next round. So actually, you want to finish first or second, because if you finish first, you're playing a third-seeded team. If you finish second, you're more likely to play a team of an equal standing. And if you finish third and you do get through, you're going to have a real tough game. And actually, you've got to play out your skins. So actually, it benefits teams going for it, winning 2 or 3 games, making sure they qualify with a game to spare. Whereas the teams that are leaving it squeaky bum time, like Italy against Croatia, for example. They're like, we really buggered up here. When you're relying on other teams to do you a favour, you've like, we actually can't do that. I think actually having this format does work in one sense where it actually punishes teams for finishing third, because then you're like, have we actually done enough? I think it does give an incentive to try and win and draw your first two games rather than you want to win your first game, draw your second game. It actually gives an incentive out of the opening round of fixtures to win out the gate and try and win your opening game, which is probably why the goals per game average has actually dropped over the 2 weeks. So the opening 4 or 5 days of the tournament, goals per game was through the roof. There was at one point, obviously Scotland, Germany aside, because that was 6 goals in a game. After the opening 3 full days of matches, we were talking about 4 goals per game average out of the first 7 games or 6 games. And then it dropped down to 3.14 because, again, the sample size gets a bit bigger. But that 3 points does not. Well, Ukraine got 4 points and got eliminated. So, yeah. And multiple teams got 3 points and got eliminated. The fact that Croatia technically was still in with a chance with 2 points, yet they got eliminated. What I'm getting at is 3 points doesn't guarantee you anything. 4 points now has been proven at an international tournament that has this third place qualification rule. Doesn't guarantee you jack, because Ukraine have just gone home with 4 points. And, so that doesn't mean anything. And Holland were very, very lucky to get out of their group with 4 points. So, and there were teams with worse records that did qualify, where Ukraine had a pretty decent record. If you look at it, if they were in another group, they qualify. They qualify second in some other groups. So, ironically, looking at this kind of actually, you can't. This is where Ukraine had to play themselves. I think wires are crossed. I think best place. No. Holland had 4 points. I think Holland had 4 points because they lost against Austria. And who else was in their group? No, Holland won a game. They had 4 points. They drew against France. They won their other game, lost against Austria. But there were some teams that got... Yeah, but there was a team that got eliminated with 4 points, and then you go to other groups, and there's teams with 3 points going through with worse records. So there is a flaw to the system where if Ukraine were in another group with the results they had, they would have qualified. But it's like England's group. Serbia were the only team that wouldn't have qualified in another group. So but Slovenia in another group wouldn't have qualified. It's just weird how each half of the draw worked, where you have three groups on each side of the draw, and out of them, the 2 of the 3 groups. So it goes into brackets. Yeah, I think it is flawed. There's a reason why the World Cup went to 32 teams quite quickly. It was the format that lasted the shortest from in the growth of the modern game. But we've got the same argument in rugby union at the moment with the World Cup when it comes to if you finish third in your group or your pool, as they say, you don't have to qualify for the next tournament. So that's why Italy were like really happy with their finishing position, because they don't have to go through the qualification process. It used to be if you finished second, you didn't, but now it's third. So the same debate's being had in rugby union, and also turnaround between games. Rugby union has the same issues in rugby union. You have the same in rugby league. They've had to change. They're going to change the format for the next World Cup in 2 years' time from what it currently is to a slim. They've decided to contract the tournament again. World Championship ice hockey, the bottom teams on each side of the bracket. So there's 2 basically mini leagues, like 2 round robin leagues, sort of like the group stage, and the bottom 2 teams, bottoms on each side get. So there could be a team on one side that finishes bottom of their group has a better record than a team that finishes second or third bottom in the other group, and they get relegated. So Great Britain this year got relegated, but in another year they had a similar record and didn't. So there's no perfect system. There is no perfect system at all. It's playoffs. We have the same debate in North American sports with the NHL. and NBA with seeds and how they seed it and wild cards, and should they just get rid of the wild card, and should they get rid of conferences and divisions? 32 works perfectly for a pro league in North America and a World Cup, yes. This is the debate we're going to have in the NHL within the next 5 years, because it looks very, very likely that the NHL is going to go to a 34-team league within the next 5 years, by the end of the decade. By the end of the decade, the NHL will be a 34-team league, and within a few more years, it'll be a 36-team league, and then it will go to a 40-team league. And I think then we're going to have debates about the structure of the domestic NHL. There were plans on the table about 20 years ago to have a European division to make it a 40-team league. Who would want a 60? The qualification would be half the nations in the world, about a third of the nations who actually are FIFA organised nations would qualify. There would be no point in having a qualification process. Every qualification group would be 3 teams, and the top team from that qualification group goes through. You just cherry pick and go, right, we're doing it Australia, New Zealand, and who else? And an Asian side. That's your qualification group. Australia and New Zealand have basically a playoff. They're the team that go through. Japan, South Korea, and China. There you go. There's your qualification group. Best team goes through. Japan or South Korea, obviously. You would have to do it like that. You're basically saying a third of the nations that qualify under FIFA right now that are FIFA affiliated would qualify for a World Cup with that format. That's basically what you're saying, because there's 195 countries, not including overseas territory. So yeah, you're basically saying a quarter to a third of nations that currently exist, be it overseas territories or actual fully independent nations who are FIFA affiliated. I think it's 190. Is it 198 or something? You're basically saying, if that's the format you would like, if it works, a third of the world's countries and territories would automatically have to go through a 3-group round robin qualify. It would actually make the qualifiers really short, because you only got to play 2 other nations twice. That's 4 games you've got to play. You've got to play 4 games. It's basically the equivalent to a very intense group stage at a World Cup and a first knockout game. Actually, that would make the qualification really easy, because only 1 team from each qualification pool through, straight up, done. Yeah, but only some of them only recently become FIFA affiliated. They don't have enough real players to be quality internationals. But you can see you'd have to be done on a geographical basis to reduce travel. So then you've got what? Liechtenstein, San Marino, and Andorra would have to go into a qualification group. Some of those lesser nations that are ranked outside the top 150, for example, would potentially have to go into a mini qualification to then bring it down to. So you would have to have some pre-qualifying tournaments to get through to a better qualifying group. To then only 1 team goes through. That's mad. You would have to get like 20 or 30 nations on the real hopeless nations to go through to a mini qualifying tournament, and out of them, the best, let's say 12, go through to the next stage, where the top of each qualifying section goes through to make 64. That's how I would do it. It'd be 128. It'd be 100. Hang on a second. 60. 100. Yeah, it'd be 128 nation qualifying to get to 64. So yeah, you would have to have all these smaller nations get through to that level to then play against the big boys. Yeah, it's doable. And you would actually have to play less qualifiers. So you'll have less international breaks to clutter the league season, and suddenly you're playing less games. So actually having a bigger World Cup would ironically mean less games if my format in my head would actually make sense, but on paper it doesn't. But I do think having a tournament where you're going to have 3rd place teams, the best of a proportion of them going through, it doesn't work, because then 4 to... At the moment, 2 teams are pissed, plus the team... 8 teams are pissed because 4 of them are finished. 6 of them are finished bottom of their group. The one that's really pissed is Ukraine. But then at the next World Cup, you're going to have what? 12 plus another 8. That's what? 20 teams are going to be really pissed out of the next World Cup or something. Or is it 12, 18 teams? Something like that could be really pissed. And then you've got 32. And then it's just... Basically, the tournament's an extra week long. That's basically what it is. My maths isn't good enough, but when you're saying if you would... The 60-14 format is just double 32. And in my opinion, yeah, that does work. But to have a 60-14 format, you would have to have a mini qualifying regional competition to get to a 32 team format. So this Euros, I'd rather they insist on 24 group winners and the two best runners up. Yeah, no, they need to get their games, TV revenue, sponsorship revenue, and there'll be a lot of teams who would vote against that because it basically penalises a lot of teams that do finish second, even where traditionally a second place in a group has qualified for the next phase. I do remember, well, I wasn't alive at the time, but in '82 they had a second group phase. They had a second group phase in '82, and I believe in '78 as well. They went through to a secondary group phase, which was weird, and they very quickly dropped it to the format we saw in USA 94 when, this works better. Like Italia 90 and USA 94. Basically, in the 80s, in 78 and 82, they had a secondary group stage, which no one liked. And that was the famous Austria-West Germany game that screwed Algeria in 82, which led to 86 being the format in the World Cup we see now, which they had until, I believe, USA 94, and then World Cup 98, they went, here you go, we've decided to change it. I can't remember, but it didn't work very well, and so they very quickly went, we need to come up with a better idea. And their better idea was, how about we just expand the World Cup to 32? We can't contract back to 16 because that means we lose money, and nations would vote against that because they have a less chance of making the World Cup. So what they did was, we'll expand it. And 32 for me was perfect. It was perfect. And then they just got greedy. They They really, you could argue why, with a bigger tournament, we are seeing lower qualities. Nations that otherwise wouldn't qualify for international tournaments are now qualifying. So everyone goes, AFCON. AFCON's terrible. It's every 2 years for a reason, but it sucks. Oh no, UEFA scrapped it because they actually had real negative fan feedback to the point where stadiums were half empty. There was people weren't watching on TV. The dead rubbers. If you actually look at the replayed footage of the two group stage Champions League from '97, was it '97? Yeah, it was '97 to about '99, 2000. If you actually look at the two group stage, look at the amount of empty seats at games, and this is when people actually have money. This was in the '90s and 2000s. Massive growth in wages. Everyone's economies were growing before the financial crash. So this is the post ERM money. So yeah, '97. I think in '99 they announced it would be scrapped, but they got rid of it very quickly. After the second season, they were like, we need to. And this is when obviously the English clubs came back into Europe. So suddenly these clubs that have been banned from the Cup Winners' Cup, Champions League and UEFA Cup suddenly surged back into Europe, and because of that, they got rid of the Cup Winners' Cup. They merged it back into the UEFA Cup, and then they were like, and you'll see the empty seats at stadiums. The empty seats at stadiums gave it away. The gate receipts were massively down, and the TV viewership figures didn't back up the change in format. Didn't work. Did not work at all. But in part because the English clubs were allowed back into Europe, which actually screwed up the fixturing, because for so long, for a decade, no English clubs could play in Europe because of the ban. And what that meant was they could still have straight knockouts, even in the old Champions League. When English clubs, apart from Liverpool till '96, when English clubs were allowed back in for the 95-96 season. So Blackburn played in the Champions League because obviously we won the league the season before. And we were also a Champions League. So I think we came in about 92. I can't remember, but we were back in Champions League by the time Blackburn are league champions. I think it was 94, and Liverpool were allowed back in the 95-96 season, I think. So Liverpool had an extra year out. But suddenly you've got these injection of these English clubs like Blackburn, Man United, and I think Arsenal. Might have been Villa, but I think it was Arsenal. Suddenly they're allowed in, and then you've got these extra clubs to fixture in. So they come up with, we'll have a group stage. I'll have another group stage because now Liverpool back in. So that's another club that's allowed back in. And the Cup Winners' Cup they announced, I think in 96, 97, they rebranded to UEFA Cup Winners' Cup from just Cup Winners' Cup. And oh, by the way, we're going to scrap it after rebranding it because of the failure of the two group stages in the Champions League had a knock-on effect on the UEFA Cup and the Cup Winners' Cup that made a bit of a mess. They bring in the UEFA coefficient. That has a negative impact. That doesn't do much for the products and is screwed it to the day. And now look, they have to go up with the Conference League to try and mend the mistakes they made in the 90s. Yeah, the second group stage at the Love Haver, the second group stage in the old Champions League format is why we had the Conference League today. They made some massive mistakes. They made some massive mistakes in the late 90s, early 2000s, and in part because of a European Super League threat from Real Madrid. Who else? Arsenal. Yeah, some the same clubs who came up with the Super League idea 20 odd years ago were the same ones who came up as the core clubs a couple of years back. Oh, hi, Dan. How you doing? Yeah, I'm all right. I've had 2 weeks off work. I've had horrible hay fever, so I'm on lots of antihistamines right now, lots of anti-inflammatories. Hair's all gone. Yeah, I've got to a point with the Euros where I'm just very fatigued with it. Don't get me wrong, I love me football, international wise. Yeah, I did. I booked 2 weeks off. I'm only allowed to take 2 weeks at a time. If I could have taken the whole month, I would have, but I'm only allowed 2 weeks per time because I'm only allowed to book half my holiday in the first half of the year and half my holiday in the second half of the year. And to be fair, I do want to have my birthday off because I'm not going to work on my birthday. I hate doing it. No, I'm doing all right. How is the Copa America being covered over in the US, Dan? And also, what did you make of the Major League Baseball being played in London as a ex-baseball player and baseball fan, considering your Mets were playing and they played quite well in the second game? So I'll be interested, from an American's point of view, how you felt the Major League Baseball games were covered, because it was interesting because I did my Major League Baseball. I've heard the crowds at the Copa America have been a bit iffy at some games. I've heard not every stadium's sold out, which is a concern for me going into the World Cup, is how much a ticket's being priced. Well, as long as it's tournament football, you're not going to win, every game. You're not going to win every fan over. Not every game is going to be brilliant. I mean, this Euros, when it started, the opening couple of games, I'm thinking, Christ, we're going to have high-scoring open games. I'm not fussed about the technical quality. If the games are entertaining because it's end-to-end, I'm happy. If there's chances being created, I'm happy. And some of the nations have actually proven they can do that. And then England and Belgium come along, and Denmark, and you want to watch paint dry. Honestly, watching Belgium play is just like how much you guys paid per week to miss an open net, and watching England play is, so how much is a pot of Dulux gloss emulsion? Because I'd rather watch that. It honestly, and then Denmark is, we're just here to grind it out. Holland, France, we're just here to grind it out, and then you're just like, yeah. I think they should never have been touted. The media, much like the media with England with their golden generation, it's gone the same way. There's been a lot of, individually they've got great players. Divided dressing room all day long. You can see it. You can see it on the body language of the players. You can see the division between the players who speak German at home, Flemish and Walloon, which is French Belgian dialect. Flemish is Belgian Dutch dialect, and German Belgian's weird. There's a bit of Belgium that actually speaks German, and their dialect is closer to Luxembourgish than actual German. German people go, I don't know what they're saying. Honestly, the German dialect they use in Belgium is closer to the national language of Luxembourg than German. Yeah, there's 3 official languages, yeah, it's weird. And the German bit, right, administratively comes under Wallonia. So that's interesting, considering the history between France and Germany over the last 150 years. Really interesting to note that. The only reason why I know why Belgium is so weird is I've been there a lot. because I obviously was born in West Germany, and we used to drive through Belgium to get to Dunkirk, Calais, or Zeebrugge to get the ferry over to England. So, or the night train to Dover to then go to London Victoria to then get the coach to the Thames Valley from Victoria bus station. So, as a kid, I went through Belgium a lot, and it's weird. It's very the Ardennes is fantastically beautiful, very historical, beautiful, fantastic part of the world. And then you reach a place called Charleroi, and then you're like, oh, that's where we had that riot in Euro 2000, and made an absolute arse out of ourselves. But we beat Germany 1-0. That's the important bit. Is we beat Germany 1-0 in Charleroi, but then you get to a city that has 25% unemployment, and is not particularly a nice place to be after 6 p.m. at night, 7 p.m. at night. It's not safe. It's one of the most dangerous cities in Europe. You get to Charleroi, you're like, lock the doors, windows up, don't stop at the traffic lights, jump the red, just jump the traffic light, get out of that. It's not nice. So there are bits of Belgium that are beautiful, and there's some really interesting places in Flanders. I've been to Belgium a lot on battlefield tours as a tourist and as a student. Did some history stuff in Belgium, and it was Flanders, the people are really friendly. Same in the Ardennes, in Wallonia, really friendly. The German bit's weird because they don't actually like Germany, but they speak German. It's weird. They don't like Germany. The German bit. I think it's Eupen is the German bit. Eupen Malmedy, heavily hammered in the World War II in the Battle of the Bulge. Basically, the whole area was carpet bombed by the Americans. The Germans killed a lot of people there and took a lot of conscripted a lot of the locals. But the history is amazing, and the buildings are fantastic. How far do I think Belgium will get? Much like England, they're going to grind out wind now. They've either got to up the energy levels, because after game one, Belgium lose, they win the second game. England have gone the other way. So Belgium lose their opening game, we win our opening game. Belgium win their second game, we draw our second game, but we score. So we score in our first two games. Belgium score in their second game, that's it. But I just don't see. I would say Lukaku needs to time his runs better, but at the same time, by the letter of the law, technically, it's correct. We can argue about VAR and its implementation and the fact, we had to have an English referee for that Belgian game, which meant it took forever to go, just call it handball. We need to have a single interpretation and a single definition of handball now. Just get rid of accidental and deliberate. Just because technically an accidental handball in the box is an indirect free kick. It's true. But they bring VAR in and they change the interpretation, and the rule's still there, but they haven't really got the wording of the current rule to mean you can actually employ that. It's a penalty. No, it's not. The players, it was like the Italian player who's facing it in Croatia game. He faces away and the ball, he's not putting his arm out, he's turning his head, he's protecting his face, which is a natural position, which means it's accidental. That should have been an indirect free kick. Referees have been too cowardly for the last 20 years to give the indirect free kick. Now they brought in VAR, they fucked up the wording, so you get the Lukaku situation against Slovakia and a 5-minute faff around where they had the snickometer. I wouldn't say the VAR is killing the enjoyment. I do think they've got the majority of the decisions done quickly and correctly. There's been about three games that I can think of the games that I've watched. I've not watched every game. I did say that would prove impossible, which it has. Partly because I've just got to the point now. It's like, nah, I'm done. I'm too tired. I've only got the one screen to use. I could get the other laptop out, my old laptop, and have two laptops going at the same time. But I don't think my internet could cope with that. And the old laptop is on its last legs. And I don't think how old's that laptop? 6-7-year-old laptop that will overheat for one. And it's really honestly, my old HP laptop, it is dying. It's on an outdated operating system, and the graphics card's crap, the sound card's crap, the webcam's crap, and there's a reason why I have my Chromebook, which is a Lenovo, which is the cheapest Chromebook we could find, and yet it's working 10 times better than a top of the range Windows HP. Even though I wanted the Windows HP version of this was £100 cheaper and budget money. VAR is to be implemented in a similar fashion to Hawkeye and tennis. Each team, we've discussed. Look, rugby league with the captain's challenge is a mess in the NRL, in my opinion. I think they've got it got that wrong. And I'm not saying watch the NRL and watch a sport that you don't like. If you want to watch rugby league and see how it's, get the NRL app, pay for the week, watch this weekend's games. You will see the bunker, as they call it, which is their version of VAR, and the captain's challenge be used throughout the game 4 or 5 times. And I tell you now, it does its job, but it doesn't. There are some really egregious calls in that which should be given, and there's been massive issues. So even though a system that actually works better than VAR, still getting massive errors, massive variation between refs and bunker officials. And I've not done enough NRL content in the last couple of weeks because of the Euros. But honestly, check out the NRL bunker and then look at how fans feel, and journos and players feel about the system. There's consistency is a massive thing. Witzel was one of the German players. You've got Hazard, he's French. Trossard, French. De Bruyne, he's from. So basically, it's like Switzerland's got 4 official languages. You look at the Swiss side from the World Cup in 2006. This is crucial, honestly. You've got French players, Italian players, German players, and I think you had 2 players who spoke Romansh, which is the language from eastern Switzerland, where you're basically close to Austria and Liechtenstein. Yes, Liechtenstein. And Romansh is just a weird language. So you'll go to an Italian village and they'll have signs in Romansh. You'll go to a German village, they'll have signs in Romansh because it's an official language. Romansh? It's a language that is related to Latin, so therefore it is related to Italian and the Lombardy, which is the Lombard dialect, which is a mix of Germanic and Italian Latin. So it's weird. Basically, you'll see regional signposts, and place names will have, basically, it looks like someone drunk and dyslexic at the same time is trying to write in that language. So I can understand a Latin phrase. I can actually read Italian. I just can't speak it very well. But I can understand basic Italian, like "do not do this." You can that means no smoking in this area. This is dangerous. Get out. I can read the Italian because I understand enough Latin to understand how the sentence is constructed. Even if I don't know what each word means, I will pick up enough from reading it going, okay, this means certain things. In Belgium, can they understand each other in the different regions? I mean, yes, it's the same as South Africa. I've got some South African mates that speak 4 to 5 languages. South Africa's got, I think, 4 official and then 25 regional official languages, and then over 100 languages spoken in total. So in South Africa, you've got English, Afrikaans, Shona, and Zulu. They're the 4 languages you have to learn in school. And then each province, you'll be given the official one and then the regional provincial languages below that. Mad that, isn't it? South Africa's got 4 official languages. Switzerland's got 4 official languages. Belgium's got 3. There's a reason why Brussels is the capital, which is right on the border between Wallonia and Flanders. There's a reason why they chose Brussels as the capital rather than Antwerp or Liège or Namur. I know my history, and I know the independence story behind Belgium and the independence war between Holland and Belgium. It's complicated. It goes on for about 20 years, and then they get independence. And Leopold, who's Queen Victoria's uncle or godfather, becomes King of Belgium. Yes, Leopold I of Belgium was related to Queen Victoria. Let that sink in. But yeah, no, they do. In Flanders, they will speak Flemish in school and have their own curriculum. And in Wallonia, they will speak French in school, have their own curriculum, but they will give you basic French and Flemish lessons. The German bit is just weird. There are people in the German bit in Eupen Malmedy who actually go to school in Germany. Because while it's an official language in Belgium, so few people speak it every day that it's pointless teaching it outside of Eupen Malmedy. So not enough kids in Liège and Namur, for example, will speak German. Not enough, but German is so similar to Flemish. Eupen is Belgium, yes. I've been there. It's UPenn Malmedy is what it's called. It's the top end of the Ardennes near Luxembourg. It's the bit near Luxembourg. Who do I think Chelsea should sign in this window? We've been linked with everyone basically. Molester. I don't know, and I think Dewsbury Hall is the one I seen play the most. But with Chelsea, they just sign anyone and they pay money because your transfer policy makes no sense. And there's a reason why Pochettino is no longer your manager. So, well, you'll probably sign someone called Hugh Joss, yes, because unfortunately, with Chelsea's transfer policy, the troll's back. Unfortunately, they've come out as a Chelsea fan, so that narrows it down to who I think it is. But no, honestly, jokes aside, this troll is persistent, and they're a Chelsea fan, so they've actually outed themselves as quite a bit of a sad act. But no, jokes aside, Chelsea's transfer policy over even the Abramovich era has been a mess. Quite frankly, and yes, he's a troll, and they're troll because they actually know my real name and they're fucking around, so they're getting very. Bye. Yeah, no. Honestly, ironically, until they started being an absolute knob, they. Yeah, I know. This is why I choose the moderators and I choose who I actually interact with in the comment sections. You'll notice until someone leaves about 3 or 4 comments in a comment on different videos in the comment section, and they're constantly appearing, I don't like or respond to them until they actually regularly on different videos on different topics, or leave constructive criticism or want to have a discussion or add something to what I've done in the video. So, but the fact they used my actual name means I now know who it is. The fact they actually know my real name troubles. This is why I don't put anything on Facebook anymore. 20 minutes, although we can just go in settings and oh no, hang on a second. Edit, here we go. Customization, minimum subscribe time. Let's be really arsey to these people. Let's go for a day. Let's really fuck them over. So basically, in order to troll, here we go. Your channel is 24 hours or longer. So this really, I always put 20 minutes, and that seems to put a lot of them off. But we'll go for a day. We'd go for a month. We'd go for a year. But then if I go for a year, that means half my moderators would be zoned out, and half my subscribers wouldn't be able to. So a day should do it. But I've noticed that a lot of the accounts I blocked after a certain number of days, they get deactivated and closed, and it's actually screwing now with my subscriber count negatively, which is actually harming the algorithm, which is harming the channel's growth. But suddenly they've made 3 more accounts, so we're going to be here for a while. Notice I put it up to 24 hours; they suddenly disappear. But they've added 5 accounts. 5 accounts today so far, and I'm just looking at it. They've made a few. Then they subscribe, and then when one gets blocked, they come up with the next one, and then they come up with the next one. And the fact that they actually know my bloody name, first and surname. Yeah, but here's the thing. Unfortunately, and I will find out. Unfortunately, like what they don't realise is people I know in my spare time away from this channel, I made some favours. I know where some of these fuckers live as well. They might know where I live, but I actually know where I live. Yeah. Now, one of my friends who is a subscriber, has basically said we must protect the algorithm at all costs. So they know what's going on, and and uh, so, but yeah, there's going to come a point where we might actually stop doing live streams altogether, completely, or I start up a brand new channel and just don't tell them and change the name. It's going to get to that point eventually. Because back in the day, I actually had anyone could leave comment, and unfortunately, oh god, what's going on? And unfortunately, that meant I had to bring in the. I'm just texting my mate back, who's actually watching in the background, and I know who it is. I know who it is. So I've warned them not to screw with this channel. I have warned them, but they're on the way out of work. They're going to get sacked soon from work anyway. I know who it is. I know who it is. There's a reason why I have like a handful of work colleagues as friends on Facebook, but I'm half tempted to get rid of Facebook as well. There's a reason why I don't share anything on Facebook anymore, for this precise reason. And no, well, social media now, I don't share. I got rid of my old Twitter account that was channel related, and now I literally just have a personal Twitter account just to see if it's changed. And I'm not happy with how it's just as bad as what it was before. So that Twitter account will be disappearing soon. But I'm not, again, sharing that detail. I do have the Instagram, and I rarely post any channel stuff on the Instagram, really. But the fact that they basically say they just come out like, I don't like Andrew Tate and shit. It gets to a point where they're screwing with the channel, and actually it's having Has Facebook peaked? I think with what we've seen with sports, I'm going to link it back to sport with officials, referees, coming out and saying that the abuse they've had off a couple of well-known social media platforms, so that'd be X and Facebook, mostly X, formerly known as Twitter. I forget the rugby league referee from the Super League, and he's come out going, "This is now out of control. Now, this is." Like Wayne Barnes, the former rugby union ref, was like, "I've had death threats against my family." I'm like, he had a bad game in a Six Nations or a World Cup, I think it was, and he was like, "I had to get police protection for it," and this is ridiculous. There's a reason why we're having problems attracting referees and linesmen and club officials and administrators to stay in the game or to get involved in the game. There's a reason why there's a refereeing shortage in all sports. And I think we've got to a point now where, without the refs, there's no game. Yeah, absolutely. And it's true. But yeah, I know who's actually trolling me now. I know exactly who it is. And yeah, the funny thing is, I know their dad, and I'm friends with their dad. I've now worked out who it is now. I've worked out who the troll is now. So yeah, and it is sad, and it is a shame that obviously the chats are getting hijacked. This happened in 2018. It happened in 2019. It happened in 2020, and then I changed everything. Subscriber only mode. I stopped doing live streams for a while, and I think there's a limit on how many accounts you can have on an email address. So, and I've reported enough of them. I've reported every single one, and Yeah, what refs small in stature? I wouldn't say all are. I mean, Henry Perenara, who was a rugby league ref, was an ex-player, and he was quite a big bloke. Kalina, football ref, was actually taller than some centre backs. Quite a few ice hockey refs are ex-players and linos who may have played at junior or amateur or semi-pro level, so they actually can skate at a decent speed with the play. Some rugby union refs, a lot of them were scrum halves. You'll notice a lot of rugby union referees at their playing days, be it at club level. There was one who was a scrum half professionally. I think he was a Kiwi. Most rugby union refs were scrum halves, so they're quite nimble players. Kalina was huge. He was 6 foot. Oh God, how tall was he? 6'2", 6'3". He was 180, 190 centimeters, something like that. He's quite a tall bloke. He was over 6 foot. But he had that presence, that intimidating presence. But no, most referees are your average Joe, 5'6" to 5'10". Rugby league refs, I think you'll find a lot of rugby league and rugby union refs were played in the halves. They're either dummy half, 5/8, half back, or rugby union fly half, scrum half. They were the creative players. So they're quite nimble on their feet and quite quick. And they've got to look at they've got to be quite close to the ground sometimes. So rugby refs of both codes are creative halfbacks, hookers, and in rugby league there'd be a hooker, halfback, 5/8, and in rugby union there'd be fly half, scrum halves. Some of them were ex-wingers as well. Oh, the Kalina stare, absolutely. That was quite something. But he had the respect of the players because he didn't take a backward step. He didn't allow the players to bully him when they crowded around him. He booked them. He had the players' respect. Yeah, he did. I think that was part of the problem. He started getting sponsorship deals, and that's what led to him retiring early. Was he had a sponsorship deal and it clashed with something, and he didn't declare it, and then he openly said, "No, I'm now. This is me saying I'm retired." He retired early because of a sponsorship deal, and then not long after he retired, we obviously find out the Italian match fixing and referee scandal, Calciopoli, and he basically said it was a good thing that I did decide to quit when I did because it avoided me having to answer awkward questions about my. I think it was Opel. I think it was Opel, the car company, Opel Vauxhall, which was part of General Motors at the time. Yeah, he retired, I think, 2004, 2005. I think he retired literally not long before the Calciopoli. And when he came out and retired, he basically said that his sponsorship arrangement they had on a personal level with Opel in Europe, which is Vauxhall here in the UK, which was part of General Motors at the time, was the clash because it also sponsored AC Milan. And he was like, that was a conflict of interest. It shouldn't have cleared through the Italian FA, who was employers, and Serie A. And I think also TIM, the version, I think that's the version of T-Mobile in Italy. One of the major mobile phone networks was also a sponsor of him. And of course, they sponsored the league and they sponsored Juventus for a bit. And so there was some conflict of interest in that regard when it came to him having these personal sponsors, and he didn't declare one of them in the right way or something. And then this particular company sponsored one of the teams, and he was like, well, I'm sponsored by the same company that's sponsoring this team. It's conflict of interest. And then he was like, not done. And I do believe it was Opel Vauxhall, basically General Motors Europe. And he was like, nah, I can't now. I cannot. And I think he actually openly went, no, this is a conflict of interest. I'm retiring. Germany could get on that home nation roller coaster. And I think Austria could be a dark horse. They honestly could because they topped their group with France and Holland in it and did it easily and should have beaten France if it wasn't for an unlucky, again, VAR and an unlucky own goal. They played better than France in that game, easily outplayed them. Spain, I think their youth and exuberance could be their undoing because while they've got a very young attacking side, defensively, not sold on Spain. Even though they got through the group really easily, they haven't been tested because Italy was so poor. Oh, I've got a big bug in my flat. That's going to annoy the hell out of me. Oh, hell. So, yeah, I think the Euros is too close to call. I think it's now a very open tournament. The French and France, Belgium, Holland, and ourselves not sold on us at all, not sold on those nations at all, not playing very well, basically just not. And I do think with how warm and how humid and the conditions, no team's going to want to do extra time penalties. Teams are going to try and want to win it. The teams that have been the most exciting to watch and the most positive have gone out to try and win every game. Regardless if they lose a game, they've still set up in a way to go, we're going to counter-attack, and when we do attack, we are going to attack and just go for it. Whereas teams that have set up to try and grind out a result actually look more fatigued. So the fact that Georgia beat Portugal with like 23% of the ball is because they decided to set up in a way where it's quick pace counter-attack, do it at pace. When do I watch England? Nicotine and caffeine. When I'm watching, it's difficult because I do also like to see other teams and other nations do well in a variety of sports. So I had to stop watching the Women's State of Origin Game 3 today. A, because New South Wales were getting battered, and B, I had to go out. But I haven't watched the full match replay on the NRL app because it was very one-sided. But how do I do it? Difficult. Anytime there's a lengthy break in play, like an injury or half time, I actually go out of the room. That bug there, is going to get it. I tell you, he's going to get squished. How do I do it? Half time, I always leave the room. I go outside either for a cigarette, I go to the toilet. I check my messages on my. I do something else other than watch the halftime waffle, as I call it. In the game, I have obviously my clicky pen. I will be probably doing this. I'll be clicking the pen. I'll be chewing on the pen, clicking the pen. I'll be fidgeting a lot. Before having the channel, it would be quite stressful watching sport with me. I basically I become a fidget. Basically, I become a massive fidget, and yeah, I'm not one of those people who will shout and scream a lot. When I'm shouting and screaming, that's generally because I've got frustrated with how a team is playing. So England lately has been a lot of I won't punch this laptop, but I have been known to back in the day throw things at my TV. And I've been known to throw things at my TV. I've been known to throw, even when I've had the YouTube channel, I've been known to lob notebooks. So all the notes I've been writing down, when I used to do it on the whiteboard, I have been known to throw the whiteboard across the room. That's when I was like, ah. When you even when I'm in neutral, sometimes the best games for me to watch when I'm neutral and I've got no horse in the race, because I will applaud a good goal. I will applaud a good save. I will a good tackle. If it's rugby league or rugby union, I'll applaud a good tackle, especially if it's a solid man and ball dump tackle hit and it's just man and ball and he's flat. I'm like, ooh. I live alone, right? So I've got no one here. I've got, okay, the bug is now, where's he gone? He's gone over there. Aha. So basically, I'm alone. I occasionally I've had friends over. I've watched matches at theirs. When I'm watching at someone else's place, I am different. I'm a fidget, and they're like, can you explain what's going on here? And I'll be like, okay, well, he's just drilled him. The referee's missed the late hit, and that's why they're fighting. That's ice hockey explained, basically. I don't try to explain the complete intricacies of why one guy's unconscious, why one guy has dropped his gloves, and why the other guy's cowering in a turtle on the floor getting his head pounded in. Because that's Detroit, Colorado in 1997 in the conference final. We're not going into that because they won't understand the hatred. But no, when I'm watching by myself, I get very fidgety. And so I will have a couple of drinks, soft drinks, or Lucasades or energy drinks in winter. I'll have my clicky pen, and obviously I'm taking notes. So the last couple of games I've taken notes on. Romania was the last game I took actual notes on. I started doing the Czech Republic Turkey, but then I was like that. So I decided I put my notes there, and then sometimes I'll have my phone out and I'm actually prepping a club history video, for example. So I was prepping that whilst watching a game. I was prepping that idea. So I was writing down, I had an idea of, okay, so I'll be researching the next 2 or 3 clubs I'm going to do videos on the day before. And then sometimes while I'm watching the game, I'll have my phone and I'll be going on various, get the information. And I'm actually sometimes writing down, for a channel video that's not even related to the game or even the same sport. Sometimes I actually just go on Instagram and watch reels and just have the game on in the background, or I will be messaging some of my friends. So I've had a couple of my mates I've actually been messaging whilst watching the game, whilst writing notes about the game to then discuss on the match review. I will sometimes actually have a full-blown conversation on the phone, on Facebook Messenger, and on WhatsApp. My reaction to Scotland's next. I didn't watch their last game because I was watching the other game in the group to start with, and then I went. Actually, no, the Scotland game. I was actually watching the 6 hours IMSA 6 hours of Salins Watkins Glen. So I was actually watching an endurance race live. That was in the last 2 hours when there was a red flag. So while the Scotland game was going on against Hungary, a friend of mine who's actually watching this, who shall remain nameless, but a friend of mine who's actually Scottish, they were watching the game and they were keeping me updated with the head injury to Vargas, the fact and how that lengthy stoppage in play and the concern around the Hungarian player, who was actually very lucky it wasn't more serious. And people would go, oh, foot players are soft. No, he ended up with a broken orbital bone, a full skull fracture, broken orbital bone, broken cheekbone, and broken jaw. So half his face is basically, he's going to need metal plates put in his head. He may not be able to play again. Let's put it that way. He's going to need a metal plate put inside of his head. So he may not be able to play again. It depends on that, because I've seen some head injuries like that. Kievu, the former Romanian and famous Serie A player, used to wear and Petr Cech obviously wore the rugby rugby scrum cap with extra padding because of head injuries. No, I didn't. I've got a lot of Scottish friends, and I like Steve Clarke as a manager. And there's a few Scottish players that I like their grittiness, I suppose is a good way of putting it. I like their intensity and grittiness and their passion for wearing the Scotland jersey. I've got friends who are Scottish, and I like Steve Clarke as a manager. I feel sorry for him because he's done a lot for Scottish football with very limited resources, both financially and playing wise, to get them to 2 out of the last 3 tournaments. Considering that Scotland haven't qualified for a tournament since '98, and Steve, that bug is going to seriously get it. Honestly, pissing me off. So in Steve Clarke's case, considering that when he took over, they hadn't qualified since '98, he's got to 2 out of 3 tournaments. In my opinion, with what he's got available to work with and the lack of depth, and again, the SFA being an absolutely chronically badly run organisation, I would actually celebrate the fact he's got him to 2 tournaments. And I like Steve Clarke, and I like what he did at St Johnstone, and I like what he did at West Brom, and I like what he did at Chelsea as an assistant. He's a very good coach. He's well regarded at Clubland for being a great assistant and actually West Brom's best ever Premier League season. Ever. Their highest points total in the league. Ever. Steve Clarke did that. So he's well regarded in Clubland in the UK. He's well regarded with a lot of coaches who work with him even foreign coaches really regard Steve Clarke quite highly. And yeah, he's actually won some major trophies, admittedly in Scotland, but he won major trophies in Scotland whilst not coaching an old firm club. That is hard to do. He did a cup double with St Johnstone. He made history by doing that. Yeah, he's a good coach. He's a good coach. He coached, that meant that both cups didn't go to one of the big firm clubs for the first time since I think the 90s or something. That is ridiculous. So yeah, no, my reaction was disappointment. Actually, I was hoping that they could get something, just because their fans have been brilliant. Let's be honest, their fans have been absolutely brilliant. In fact, most of the fans have been brilliant. There's a lot of. I found something on Instagram where they had English, Scottish, German, Austrian, Dutch, Italian, Albanian, all these fans in a city square in Frankfurt having a massive with the guy with the saxophone. They got two of them now. Now there's two saxophone German fans, and they've got whole fan groups just outside in Frankfurt and Dusseldorf. They're having a laugh. Where's this antagonism? Where's this violence between fans? It's not there. We should be rivals, but at the same time, I think we should also support each other if the other team isn't playing. I know we're not in the same group personally. I find it weird that we have to hate Scotland, hate Wales, hate Northern Ireland, hate the Republic, hate us, hate England. I just find it weird. I find it really odd. I do. For me, and I'm being honest here. For me, I like to actually. It was good to see Wales at international tournaments. It was good to see Scotland. It was good to see Northern Ireland make international tournaments with their player base and their popular. I mean, that was great. And it was great to see the Republic at multiple tournaments in my lifetime. So honestly, it's good to see that the progression that's been made since the 90s. The problem is Scotland struggled for most of my lifetime, whereas Northern Ireland, Wales, and the Republic have been to tournaments on more than one occasion, and Scotland were like, yeah, we can't qualify. And then eventually they decide to hire Steve Clarke, and he qualifies them for 2 out of 3 tournaments. They'll be mad to sack him, because I can't see another coach going in there doing better. And Scotland, like England, have tried the foreign route with Bertie Vogts, and that was an absolute disaster. That's where they hit real low point. And the SFA have allowed the game in Scotland to become an absolute mess at club level. It's a mess. They've got some really bad TV deals. There's no money up there. And you've got 2 clubs that go, you've got a decent player, have you, Aberdeen? You've got a decent player, Motherwell. Well, have that. Hibs Hearts got a decent player. Yeah, we'll have you. Although Hibs and Hearts put up a bit more resistance. Yeah. I think, again, similar situation to Scotland with Page. I feel sorry for him, I do. But the results after they had a poor start. What did them was the poor start to the qualifying campaign. The rest of their qualifying campaign actually was pretty decent. But then, those 2 really bad defeats early on in the qualifying campaign did for them. But Turkey made it to the Euros. Croatia made it to the Euros. Slovakia hammering them. Well, Slovakia are now in the knockout stages and have had a pretty decent tournament, all things considered. Losing to teams that actually made it to the tournament is not a problem. Losing to teams that you are expected to batter 4-0 and you actually lose by a similar scoreline is a problem. The Armenia, that there was issues there, but they recovered. And they actually, got to, get through 2 phases of playoffs. They lose on a penalty shootout. That against a side that struggled at the Euros. So Poland were terrible. And a lot can happen between qualification campaign and actual tournament. Players get injured, players get suspended, players are ill, players lose form. But yeah, the first time you play Gibraltar, you hammer them. The second time, you struggle. That weren't great. That's not a good advert, and that's also a bit of an indictment on the young players and how are they being coached and developed at their club level. So you can go at Rob Page and go, he's not qualified for a tournament. He's taken the team to 2 tournaments out of 4. I think he took to their first World Cup since the 50s. But again, it's a results business, and he might have been offered a club job, but they can't afford the buyout clause. So, yeah, look, the fact that Poland got through without having a single shot sums it up. But again, they took Lewandowski, and Lewandowski looked hopeless. So club form and international form are 2 different things. Poland looked terrible. And there are other players apart from Lewandowski, but the obsession with Lewandowski is the problem for Poland because they've got a very good, hard-working technical side. They are a very good, hard-working technical side, and every so often they unearth a superstar. They're just living off past glories like the 70s and the 80s, and you cannot do that. It's like us. It's like a lot of nations are looking at past glories and living off what were the reputations of superstar players 2-3 generations ago. A generation ago. You can't do that. You need to invest. But this is, again, the UEFA coefficient is hurting Polish clubs now, which it wasn't in the 90s. And that's the problem. You look at Norway, Sweden, they're not qualifying for tournaments at the moment. Sweden, okay, bigger population size and some better clubs, but Norway haven't qualified for a tournament for a long time. They got a couple of the world's best players can't qualify for a tournament. Do you know why? Because the UEFA club coefficient kills them. Whereas, as we were talking about how European football was organised before the group stages were brought in European football, they had some great nights. The only bright spark they've had is Bodo Glimt getting to a European quarter-final. No, they were 74. They were a very good side in the mid-70s, and then 82 as well. So the 70s and 80s, actually, they were quite good. There was only a handful of sides better than them in the 70s and the 80s, and that was the Dutch, that was the Germans, and that was the Italians. And I'm not joking. They were better than Brazil in their peak era. And I'm not... Where's that bug gone? Oh, he's flown out. No, they were better than Brazil in their peak era. They were actually better than Brazil. They had some of their best players were given special dispensation to actually play outside of Poland and play in Western Europe by the communist government. So let that sink in. They realised if we don't, we're not going to do anything. I think since 1982, maybe 86, I think it was 86, they haven't got past the group stage. They've been to 2 World Cup semi-finals, and that's it, in 74 and 82. But they did have some good players in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s. But then it's all about... But this is the thing. You look at some great sides on paper, and in reality, they don't play well. You can have a team. It's like Spain would always fall apart at Euros and World Cups. And then 2008 to 2012, they got it to work. They had 6 years where they figured out how to get it to work. Every other tournament, they would fight each other internally. And there was club rivalries and political regional rivalries in there because Spain is Basque, Catalan, and Castilian, basically. And then you have all the other regions like Andalusia, you have the Balearic Islands, and then you've got the bit where Celta Vigo play, which is Galicians, right in the top corner. You have all the regions of Spain; they all hate each other, and you've got Basques and Catalans don't like each other. They really hate each other. And that goes back to the Civil War when they actually didn't help each other properly. And then you've got Castilians, so Madrid, and they don't like Catalans and Basques, and they hate. You've got 3 groups that hate each other. And then you've got the regions like you've got Andalusia, you've got the Balearics, you've got Galicia, you have other regions that are near the Basque Country. So the Pyrenees is a bit dodgy. And then you've got other bits in central Spain that don't like Madrid. And it'll be interesting. But the discussion is basically because the EU doesn't want to have succession movements because it gives basically further impetus to the populist anti-EU parties that are gaining a lot of traction. The EU rather it didn't. The EU that's the EU rather didn't happen. No, the EU would rather Spain didn't, because actually it weakens the EU's economy, because then what currency would they use? And it makes a mess economically, and it makes problems. They have had a Catalan national side and a Basque national side, and they do play against each other, and they do play against actual fully fledged FIFA nations. I remember Ivan Campo played for Mendieta and Mendieta, and there was another player in the 90s played for the Basque team, and you had players like Ivan Campo. I think Ivan Campo played for the Basque team, and then the Catalan team had Pep and Puyol, a young Puyol, by the way. And then Ramos actually played. What's the Valencia region is Andalusia, I think. I think Valencia's in Andalusia. It might not be. And then there was the other regions all had their own teams. They actually, all the regions in Spain have their own national sides. So you've got, the Basque country, the Basque, and you've got the Catalonia Basque country, which covers Navarre and Pamplona, and there's the Basque people was Bilbao, but then you've got places like Navarre, which is sort of like in between Catalonia, France, and Bilbao. Yeah, I'm doing my geography and history all at the same time, which used to be a separate country, Navarre, by the way. It's a thing. Check out Henry IV of France. It was check out Henry IV of France, formerly Henry I of Navarre. Check him out. First Bourbon king, very interesting character. Very, very interesting character. He married two separate Medici relations who were second cousins. Weird. His first wife was actually related to his second wife. Weird. And his mother-in-law was also related to his second wife. It's weird. Andorra, they speak Catalan, actually. Ironically, officially Spanish, but they actually will speak Catalan, because the Bishop of Urgell in Spain is a Catalan-speaking area. It's weird. They have co-princes. So the president of France, formerly the king of France, would have been one of the co-princes. Or the Dauphin, I think it was for a period, it was the Dauphin of France used to be the co-prince, but then it became the king. And then, because it used to be the Kingdom of Navarre. And the Bishop of Urgell, which is actually in Catalonia, so they speak Catalan, but yeah. Andorra are getting better because they have a decent system where their best players play in Spain and France. And actually, Andorra are actually quite a wealthy country for GDP and spending parity, and same with Liechtenstein. They're getting a lot better because their top team actually plays in the Swiss league, and their best players actually play at some pretty decent clubs all around the world, and they've got a lot of money. Andorra and Liechtenstein. Luxembourg was another one that used to struggle for many years, and then I started looking at their football clubs and their league, and actually it's really competitive. The Luxembourg league is really competitive. There's a lot of different league champions in Luxembourg. That is a massive, very long road. That's a big fucker. That's a big bug. But yeah, no. Oh yeah, Luxembourg's a lot of teams, and they've got a big overseas expat population from Portugal, Italy, Switzerland, and I think France. But there's a massive Italian population. There's a massive Portuguese population. Of course, they all love football. But their top league is actually bigger than Scotland's top division. There's more teams playing in the Luxembourg top flight than Scotland's top flight. Let that sink in. No, seriously, let it sink in. Their top flight has got more depth than Scotland. More teams. It's scary, that. And their second division is bigger than Scotland's second tier as well. Yeah, that is a really massive bug. That thing is fucking huge. Sorry, I'm just going to have to do some bug control. That is a big bugger. That is a really big bugger. But no, yeah, they're yeah, it is. No, the Welsh top league is not as bad as San Marino, actually, but unfortunately, the money isn't there. The money is not there, and the news that's coming out of Port Talbot is sad. what's happening in Port Talbot with the steelworks in 2 weeks' time. They're going to start closing it down early, and there's a lot of job losses coming to South, even a wealthy part of Wales in comparison. There's going to be a lot of job losses in South Wales, a lot of job losses. And yeah, and of course, what impact a quality of a league? The League of Ireland suddenly has become very, very interesting to look at. I read an article going about the League of Ireland. It has become dirt cheap. Yeah, because now properties are worthless, so people just don't want to sell property. People who invested in property have buggered themselves, but people who just worked hard doing all right. But there's a housing shortage, so rents are a problem, but wages have gone through the roof. So actually, people have got disposable income. If you paid your mortgage off in Ireland and you're financially secure, you've got money to spend. You can afford to go to games, you can afford to buy merchandise. The League of Ireland to become more competitive, yes. Club owners are going to have to invest, and they're going to have to get. Yeah, but that's the Welsh FA. They're in charge of governing the game. That's the Welsh Premier and their sponsors and the clubs, the club chairman. But Wales just doesn't have the disposable income. It doesn't have the infrastructure. It doesn't have the money. No offence, but the steel and coal industries in Wales have been buggered for 40 years, and now happening in Port Talbot is the death knell of heavy industry in Wales. And the rural agricultural industry has been hammered by the government in Wales. And outside of Swans, Cardiff, Newport, and Llanelli to a point, you've got some beautiful coastal towns and some beautiful national parks, and some lovely university towns like Aberystwyth, and you've got some beautiful places on the Cambrian coast and on Pembrokeshire. But there's a problem. They're reliant on tourism and they're reliant on the education industry. And with central government in Westminster and some of their political decisions, that's causing a problem. And then you've got really rural locations like North